All right, welcome. It seems like it's been forever since the Judiciary Committee has met, but it's been a long summer and now we're almost entering the fall. At least in Cheyenne, it felt like fall the other day. It was Saturday, it was rainy and bitterly cold, and then Sunday it was what, in the 80s, right? But that's Wyoming. We go ahead and call the roll.
Senator Cooper. Here. Senator French. Senator Kolb. Present. Senator Cost. Present. Representative Crago. Here. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Oakley. Here. Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Washut.
Here.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Representative Zwanitzer. Here. Co-Chairman Olson.
Here.
Co-Chairman Nethercott. Quorum present.
Excellent. Co-Chairman, do you have any opening remarks before we get started?
Good morning. Look forward to a very productive 2 days and great to see all of the members of the Joint Judiciary Committee and our excellent LSO staff. Good to see you.
Committee, we have a pretty packed full agenda, but that seems to be the case for us all the time. So I will do my absolute best to keep us rolling along, as I know we have good work to do, but we don't want to be here all night. So up first, we have our State Park Rangers retirement. We do have a bill draft. Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, before I get started, just like to, with your indulgence, take a moment and introduce our newest LSO staff attorney, Talise Hansen.
You know what? Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Who's sitting at the end. She is a graduate of the College of Law at the University of Wyoming, spent the previous year clerking for Justice Gray. So we're delighted to have her join us.
Yeah, welcome. We are happy to have you, and if we could have, I don't know, 3 or 4 more attorneys, we'd probably be 3 or 4 times more productive. So glad you're here.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 23 LSO 94, working draft 0.4. This should be 3-01 in the meeting materials. This is the bill draft the committee requested in May to have full-time state park rangers authorized to be part of the law enforcement retirement plan instead of participating as general members. So in the bill draft on page 2, line 16, simply inserts full-time state park ranger in the definition of law enforcement officer in the Wyoming Retirement Act. And then moving on to page 3, lines 2 through 5 and 8 through 9. This subsection was created in 93432 a few years ago to authorize peace officers who are peace officers to be eligible for death and disability benefits under the law enforcement plan. So it was a kind of a separate carve out for them. This language is really just conforming language that if a full-time park ranger does not elect to participate in the law enforcement plan, those full-time rangers would continue to be eligible for disability and death benefits under the law enforcement plan. So it's intended to keep the status quo for any full-time rangers who do not elect participation in the law enforcement plan. And then page 3, line 11, provides that beginning on July 1st, 2023, full-time park rangers are covered as law enforcement members unless a full-time ranger elects to continue as a general member under the retirement plan, in which case they must provide notice to the retirement board by April 30th, 2023. Once an election is made, it cannot be rescinded, so it's a one-time choice to continue participating as a general member. And then page 3, line 19, the last sentence in this section 2 states that service credit in any other retirement plan other than previous credit as a law enforcement officer shall not be included as service credit as a law enforcement member. So a member who transitions to the law enforcement plan from the general plan would start with 0 law enforcement credit. And this bill draft is basically a carbon copy of the draft of the bill that the legislature enacted I believe 2 or 3 years ago that inserted community college police officers as participants in the law enforcement plan. And then this bill would be effective immediately. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions.
Committee, do you have any questions for Mr. Fuller regarding the bill draft? Yes, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to ensure that I'm correct, there's no funding attached to the current bill draft. Is that correct?
Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, that's correct. No appropriation.
Representative Craigo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, so just to make sure I'm not confused. So in section 2, it's talking about previous credit. If we have a park ranger who's been in service for the state for 20 years, does that transfer over or only from a previous occupation? Is that what we're talking about?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, if those 20 years were 20 years as a general member, they would not transfer to be counted as under the law enforcement plan.
Follow up, Representative Craigo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regardless of the occupation.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, that's correct.
Anything else for Mr. Fuller, committee? Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the public employee plan, the PE plan, and when you transfer to law enforcement plan, the contributions that you put into the PE plan, what happens to those contributions for said employee that would transfer? Thank you.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, that's probably the mechanics of that, I think, would be best addressed with Mr. Swindell with the retirement system.
Well, so opportune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Kolb, I didn't think I'd be on the microphone this quickly. Welcome, Senator Nethercott. I think the committee should be aware that Senator Nethercott, your co-chair, is a liaison to the retirement system and has been an effective and engaged liaison. Thank you for your service there. To answer your question, the question was, what happens to the money that was contributed to the public employee plan for an employee that is then transferred to another retirement plan, in this case, the law enforcement plan? What we do is we take the sum of money based upon the funding status of the plan, and that money, we would transfer that money from the public employee plan to the law enforcement plan in proportion to the credit. So it's something internal to the retirement system, but since the benefit will be drawn in this plan, we would transfer dollars to this plan. And one of the complications of this situation, of course, is that the money that's been contributed in the PE plan for a conversion is not really sufficient to pay for the enhanced benefit. And we've done some detailed analysis on that. We can get into that a little later, but that's, we'll handle the transfer. It's not a problem. It's on us.
Vice Chairman Washit.
Not so fast.
Mr. Swindell, sorry.
One more question.
Why don't you, yeah, just hang out in that seat for a little bit.
Just like a quarterback tried to escape the pocket, got tackled.
Thank you for being here this morning. So in the event an employee has been with the State Parks Department long enough to be eligible to retire or be vested under that original EE plan, could they do that and continue on working as a law enforcement ranger in the law enforcement plan?
Mr. Swindell.
Mr. Chairman or Representative, the situation will vary dependent upon the case. The situation is here, the question is if a person is vested. And we're going to have 2 people that I think fit that category of there's 5 people that are full-time parks rangers, and that's part of the confusion on this bill is you want to do everybody, you just want to do, anyway, it's 5 full-time. One of those people should not convert, and they would choose the election to stay in the PE plan. And that's because that particular person is already a retired annuitant in the law enforcement plan, drawing a benefit. And so he can build a new benefit in another plan. It's just like a deputy sheriff who becomes a teacher. And that happens a fair amount. So it's to his benefit to not convert, because if he converts, then he's going to be what we call a rehired retiree. And according to IRS regulations, there's only two ways to do it. One is he has to stop his benefit from the LE plan, and then he can continue to build more service in the LE plan. And then when he finally really retires, then he would have an adjusted benefit. Generally, that doesn't work for most people. They don't want to stop their monthly benefit of several $1,000s. The other way is we could employ the rehired retiree rule, which exists in the law enforcement plan. That allows the person to keep drawing their existing retirement benefit, but then they don't gain any more credit for the time they're working in the plan. So he's not going to be able to build a second retirement. He's better off with the status quo, is my point. So you're really left with four people. They are a couple of flavors. There are two of them that will not be vested, and two of them that will be vested. The people that are vested will essentially have their credit on deposit with us, but if they haven't hit normal retirement age, they either are not eligible to retire and draw a benefit, or they are subject to a 5% per year haircut on that benefit for every year they are short of minimum or normal retirement age. One of those persons is tier 2, and they have to get to age 65. And they would be substantial, they're not quite eligible even, they have to hit minimum age 55, and this person, I believe, is 2 years short of that. My memory serves me correctly. So what happens with that, they just have to wait until they either hit at least minimum and take the haircut, or wait until they hit normal retirement age, which is age 65 in tier 2 in the PE plan. The other person is tier 1. So the difference there is his normal retirement age is age 60, but he's also a little further away. So what you wind up in that case is they have their benefit, they can let it stay there, and they will be able to draw a benefit later on when they hit normal retirement age. The only difficulty is that their highest average salary will reflect the highest average salary of 2022 purchasing power in their salary. One of these people will be almost a decade before they can draw their benefit. Another one, about a decade and a half. And so since they can't maintain the highest average salary, it diminishes the eventual purchasing power of that benefit when they do retire. For the non-vested people, it's a little bit more of a problem. They don't have the right to an annuity. You have to be vested with at least 4 years of service in the public employee plan. And it's based upon a 5-year highest average salary. So I always say 4 years is kind of vested light, because you don't have you get on 60 months, you get 12 zeros factored into the highest average. Neither of these people will become close to being vested. At that point, their only option will be, if they never return to the public employee plan and become vested, then their best option will be to refund that money. If you refund, you lose the employer contribution, which is about half. And furthermore, you also lose that part of the employee contribution that was subsidized by the employer. And the employer in this case is the state of Wyoming, and they do subsidize a substantial amount of that employee contribution. It's 5.57% of the 9.25% employee contribution. So they really wind up, the plan keeps the employer part, they keep that subsidy part. They really wind up with only about 20% of what has been contributed to this point for their retirement benefit. It's a pretty substantial haircut when you take a refund, especially if you're not vested. If you become vested, then you get to keep that employee subsidy. Does that answer your question, sir?
And some. Which, Mr. Swindell, that probably covers the extent then of your testimony. I assume that you would offer us, or do you have anything else that you would?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to make just a couple of remarks, and maybe that'll be sufficient. We'll try to, it might be more efficient that way.
Sure.
First of all, I just want to make the point, it's not the retirement system's role to constrain the operations of an employer. It's an employer-sponsored benefit for the benefit of employees, for recruiting and for retention. Employers have to manage their workforce. Darren has a job to do. And as much as possible, we want to keep the retirement system out of his way. Sometimes that's not possible because it is a tax advantage retirement program. We have IRS regulations and we have to obey our own law under the Wyoming Retirement Act. I think most people are aware that Wyoming is typical in that we do have different retirement programs. I mean, Senator Nethercott knows this well, but perhaps the people that might be watching on the video might not understand. We have, like most states, Wyoming has a retirement plan for employees, but then we have smaller separate plans for public safety employees. That's because those programs typically have a larger benefit, an earlier normal retirement age, and it's all designed to facilitate and reflect the unique aspects of those occupations. In general, you want people, it takes a little larger benefit to attract people to that occupation, which has its own hazards. They usually have different death benefits as well. And generally speaking, it enables a person to retire earlier and perhaps have a second career, as we don't necessarily want too many senior citizen police officers and firefighters and so on. So it's all designed for that, and Wyoming's structure is very typical in that. And that means that when you take a person from the public employee plan and put them in the law enforcement plan, the benefit is larger, and therefore it is more expensive. And I think that's the main thing that everyone just needs to understand. And then the actuaries can do some calculations, all depends upon how much has been contributed and what the difference is and so on, and we've done that. For the 4 people that are envisioned here, in the end, it would actually, to be fair to both systems, to be fair to the PE plan and the law enforcement plan, we need an additional $132,731. It's a public policy choice whether to allow for that to happen. It's a small enough amount in this case. I suspect Parks can probably eventually take that out of their appropriation. They may not need an additional appropriation in order to do that. And of course, there's a policy change. There's the memo reflects the change in the funding status. If you didn't do that, it's in basis points and probably reflects a level of precision in these estimates that doesn't really exist. Senator Nethercott knows that. It's just actuarial. But there's a principle here. It is a benefit increase, and in general, it is sound public policy to fund that benefit increase. Although, in fairness, you wouldn't have to. That's a policy decision for this legislature, and it's not my role to tell the legislature what to do either.
Mr. Director Swindell, just to clarify, that number is 130,251. Is that what you said?
132,731, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you. I was trying to track that through your, well, not your memo, something else I'm looking at. So I'm looking at the wrong thing. I appreciate that. Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. We also have a law enforcement plan for DCI, Highway Patrol, is that correct? And what would be the relative merits to having these state park rangers in a plan with deputy sheriffs and municipal police officers as opposed to a plan with similarly situated state employees?
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. Interesting question. As I said, we have different plans for public safety, and in the law enforcement arena, Wyoming has 2 of them. We have the law enforcement plan, and then we have the warden patrol and DCI plan. The warden and patrol and DCI plan is just for state employees, and it's just for state troopers, game and warden, sworn game wardens, and agents of the Division of Criminal Investigation in the AG's office. It is a separate plan that goes back, I believe, to 1956. When the law enforcement plan was created circa 2000, that was a consolidation of some state systems and some local retirement systems, like the city of Cheyenne had their own pension plan and so on. And at that time, there was some proposal to combine the plans. But the sponsors of the Warden and Game Fish Patrol Plan wanted to keep their plans separate. It had certain slightly different issues, 6 years vesting instead of 4. And anyway, they didn't want to get, they wanted to keep their own plan. They're similar but not identical. The law enforcement plan is about 74% local and 26% state employee. The state employees are the Department of Corrections. Corrections officers are in the law enforcement plan. It also includes dispatchers for the highway patrol, but not the sworn troopers. And then it includes a few agents of the Gaming Commission and the enforcement agents on the Livestock Board. And after that, though, it's mostly deputy sheriffs from your counties and city police officers. So that's the makeup of the two plans, and it's just historical why they're separate. There are a few differences, and the plan sponsors wanted to keep it so. So in the end, if you were to move parks rangers to the law enforcement plan, that's similar to state employees that are dispatchers, similar to correction officers, similar to enforcement agents on the Livestock Board and Gaming Commission.
Committee, anything for Director Swindell? Director, is that it? Anything else?
Not for now, Mr. Chairman. I stand, I'll be in the back to answer any questions.
Yeah, hang out just in case, but we'll move over to Parks. Director Westby, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, Darren Westby, Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. Thank you for taking on this bill. As Director Swindell said, we've been working with them quite a bit to try to ensure that we understand what we're getting into, as well as what potentially could be the cost or the ramifications of, as he said, either transferring everybody into the LE program or giving them the option, which we greatly appreciate having them have the option, not forcing them into a system. Our concern from a retention and recruitment standpoint is if we do not have the ability to transfer them into the law enforcement program, we have the unfortunate opportunity to orphan several years. I should introduce my team. I got Deputy Director Nick Nealon, as well as our Chief Law Enforcement Ranger, Mark Coughlin. Prime example, he's got a year of service in the PE plan, because that's what he can get into right now. If we transfer him over, that 1 year goes away. I mean, it's this orphan year of service that has no ability to be retained in a retirement system. Whereas we have some that are like at 3.5 years or getting close to 3 years. That's 3 years of service in a retirement plan that just gets orphaned. We have, as he mentioned, the one individual with 15 plus years. Transferring that person over, yes, he can keep the 15 years in the PE plan and then starts right back over in an LE plan. Well, he's got 5 years before he can retire in that program. So serving over 20 years of service.
Tag team just a little bit.
Please.
Committee, one thing I did not mention that I probably should have, for the non-vested people that would be left with the orphan credit, well, frankly, for, everybody, they start anew in the law enforcement plan with 0 vesting, and it's 4 years. So you think you're halfway there? Now you're not. That's another point.
So, Mr. Chairman and committee, I just appreciate the opportunity to try to find a way financially, whether it's internal or external, to have the ability to find that $132,000, make the transition, make both programs whole, the PE and the LE plan whole, with finding that $132,000, make the transition. Those that elect to come over can start, can carry their years of service over. Those that don't can stay in their plan and probably have that opportunity to still continue to draw the retirement out of the LE and build his PE retirement plan. So again, Mr. Chairman, committee, I stand for any questions, and I have the brain trust behind me, and obviously the brain trust of retirement sitting next to me.
Director Westby, I think you just answered what was going to be my big question, which was the appropriation, which is not needed because you feel confident or comfortable that you'll be able to find it within your existing budget?
Mr. Chairman, we're in an unfortunate time right now where we have some significant vacancies that we're having troubles filling. And so there is a buildup of the vacancy amount in our budget that we feel that is able to cover this. Maybe not exactly today because we're relatively new into the biennium, but hopefully with some patience with our retirement system, we can come up with a program or a plan in which to ensure that both systems are whole, either within the near future, at least by the end of the biennium. And if at all possible, we usually do not have any reversions in the non-100 series. That's the goal, is to try to ensure that we spend the amount of money that you all appropriate to us to ensure that we do our jobs. But if there is any left over in the 200 series or what have you, that could also be an avenue in which we can try to rotate that over into a payment.
I appreciate that. I feel like my life is always easier when I don't have to defend a bill in the Appropriations Committee, so. Vice Chairman Washit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so I'm clear, if we come up with 132,771, then these people who have 3 years or 1 year of service, they're made whole and they will be credited as having 3 years experience under the law enforcement plan. They'd be 3 years closer to retirement. If we don't come up with 132,000, then they just lose those years of credit, or they have to stay in the PE plan. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, you hit it right on the head. I believe there's, that answer is correct. That the individuals either have to make the choice of staying in the plan because they have 3 years already, or start fresh and have 3 years orphaned. So, unless Director
Mr. Chairman,
Swindell has something.
Representative, just to clarify, they don't lose the credit in the PE plan. It's just orphaned with all the issues that go with that. We would never just remove somebody's retirement benefit. It becomes orphaned.
Representative Zwanitzer?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Director Westby, how many full-time peace officer, let's say post-certified employees do you have, or are you budgeted for?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we have 5 full-time post-certified law enforcement people that would be eligible for this plan. In the summertime, obviously, we grow potentially 50 extra seasonal, 75 extra rangers on a seasonal basis as needed to ensure that we have the appropriate law enforcement in our system.
And Mr. Chairman, each one of those seasonal workers work between 10, but some of them do work up to 40 hours a week for, let's say, 3, 4, 5 months. I mean, they're basically full-time employees for, let's say, 3 to 4 months. They would not be eligible under this, or they would be eligible for those 4 months. So what I'm ultimately asking, so we're on the same page, I'm a peace officer. I work for the local sheriff's office. I'm a little burned out. I want a break. I can go work for state parks for 4 full-time months over the summer. My question is, can I keep in the law enforcement retirement system if I take a break in service from some other post-certified position, come work for you for 6 months for the summer, jump back to the local sheriff's office? Would my pension be covered or not?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Zwanitzer, I'll try to give this an answer. If not, I got several people here that can correct me when I'm wrong. There is no seasonal that we're trying to get accomplished with this, regardless of full-time status. It's the classified position, the 5 classified positions that are lieutenants that are the ones that we're trying to get into the system. So if you come and work as a seasonal for 5 months, you are not included in the system. You are included in the death and disability portion, because we pay that 1% to ensure that if something happens while you're on the job, that you are covered into those, regardless whether you're seasonal or full-time classified positions, but no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Swindell, the current policy is these funds have to be 100% actuarially sound before they can pay a COLA to the retirees. Does this change make any difference in terms of when the law enforcement plan will be eligible for COLAs, or is there any negative impact?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it depends upon whether the transfer is funded in some fashion or not. The difference is that right now, the law enforcement plan is funded at, it's rated at 84.668%. And what that means for folks that don't quite understand is you take the actuarial value, the present value of all the future benefits that the actuaries estimate to be paid, you discount that back at the assumed rate of return, and you compare that to your assets. And we compare that to our assets in two ways. One, we compare it on an actuarial basis, where we smooth our asset gains over 5 years. In other words, we only book 1/5 of last year's 17% gain. That's to smooth out the volatility. And that's the 84.668 that's presently rated. The other way to look at it is you can just do it on a market value basis. And as of 1 January, market value was quite a bit in excess of that. It was about 94%. That's what we mean by funding ratios. In the retirement business, we know that markets are going to fluctuate. The last 6 months is a really good example of that. So we go with the actuarial stuff. But the difference between if these people come in and there is no money that comes into it, then the funding ratio goes down to 84.654%. That's minus 1.4 basis points. And again, all of this implies a level of precision that isn't really there, right? But so, and this, it's not going to make any material difference as to when this plan gets to 100%. The plans are on track. There is an issue with the law enforcement plan, just so members of the legislature understand. It's going to continue to grow. It'll hit about 94%, and then it flattens out. It never hits 100%. The contribution rate is too low. And so the board is going to develop a program that's going to seek a rate increase. The public or the law enforcement plan has never had a rate increase since 1 July of 2002. It's been 20 years. All the other plans, they've had rate increases. This one never has. It's time. The actuaries say it needs 3 to 5%. Whether it's 3 or whether it's 5 depends upon whether or not we modify the benefit in some fashion. Perhaps the normal retirement age. This week, the retirement board's going to receive a briefing from our actuaries, which is going to lay out some options. And the concept is to lay those options out, have them vetted with the board, and then we're going to go to the stakeholders, all those city police departments, all those deputy sheriffs, Department of Corrections, parks if you're included in it, all the stakeholders, and say, well, what do you want to do? What's your preference? And so we can provide that information to the legislature with an eye of going for a rate increase, not in this upcoming session, but in the budget session of 2024. But so anyway, what the folks should understand is the plan's in pretty good shape. 84% is pretty good. Going to head to 94, but we want to get it to 100, and it'll need a rate increase to do that, just so you know. But this issue is so small, it won't impact the trajectory of that. I can't represent that to you. It's more of a principle thing.
Co-Chairman Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yeah, I would just like to reinforce to the committee the significance of this action, which is de minimis in light of the fact that we're discussing 5 employees. And I think the circle back that Representative Zwanitzer was driving at was the likelihood that it will ever be greater than 5 employees is what, Director Westby?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, right now it's 5 because we have 5 large water-based parks. Depending on how our system grows, we may see another full-time law enforcement if, say, This body, the legislative body, I should say, grants us the ability to take over another water park that requires a full-time ranger, then we would have to add that individual to this person. That's why I think the definition is sound as to full-time state park ranger in the definition to ensure that. But right now, we have 5, and unless we grow. Sure.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I might add that for any of the employers in the law enforcement plan that add a position, add a deputy sheriff, we add a corrections officer, we add a dispatcher. In general, those people enter the plan, they pay their full contribution rate, and the full contribution rate equals their normal cost. And so we'll be fine. In fact, the normal cost is, the contribution rate is just a little bit above normal cost, which is why the plan will continue to grow a little bit. The problem of it is it's not enough above the normal cost to increase the funding at the rate that the board desires within 30 years. So new employees that enter the plan are not a problem. And in fact, it's actually it's a benefit.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Swindell. Thank you, Director Westby. Chief, did you have any comments that you'd like to make? Nothing to add. Okay, thank you. Anything else, Director?
Mr. Chairman, no, just if you had any questions about any potential ideas of how to modify Section 2, we stand at the ready for. Mr. Chairman, why I say that is that last sentence basically excludes any transfer from the PE to the LE.
Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's, as drafted, that's correct. At this point, that service credit, even though the funds would transfer, the years of service would not. And that would lead to the outcome of, I believe that the term was the orphaned years of service credit. I mean, that sentence, it's certainly the will of the committee to amend that sentence or not as it sees fit.
Oh, Director Swindell.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, if the person doesn't transfer, the credit doesn't transfer, the money doesn't either. They just start anew in the law enforcement plan with 0 credit, 0 contributions, and they start anew just like a new employee.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on future employees' cost. With the retirement system change, how much would you anticipate, if any, that there's going to be an increased cost because of the better benefits in the LE plan?
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm may need a clarification on the question. How much do I see an increase in cost? You mean in our standard budget because of the change from?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That Mr. Swindell might be able to answer a little bit more on the standard budget increase because.
Mr. Chairman,
Swindell, is that not the 132? Or why is it more than that?
Right now, the total contribution in the public employee plan is 18.62%. And the total contribution in the law enforcement plan, a richer benefit, is only 17.2. How is that? Well, that's a problem. That's why that's going to change. How it changes and what the future costs will be depends upon 2024 and how the legislature resolves the issues. I would anticipate that probably there's going to be at least a 3% increase, and probably that will be split 50-50 between the employer and the employee, and they're really going to force the employee to pay. So I think the employer contribution is probably going to go up about 1.5% of pay. And it could be 2% of pay or a little bit, but it's going to be right around there. It depends upon the choices that the legislature considers in the budget session. but something like that. It is going to, right now, it's actually cheaper, but it's not sustainable. And so I wouldn't rely on that.
I think at the end of the day, all that matters to us is that whatever the change is to your budget, Director, that you are comfortable with finding what that is. I just don't want to, and if you're not, we just need to know that that's the reality when we move the legislation forward. Otherwise, I don't know that the exact dollar matters as long as you can take care of it in your budget. There's not an appropriation in this bill.
Mr. Chairman, for example, this last biennium, I think we reverted over $1 million, and I'll call our agency a small to medium in 100 series personnel, just because of vacancy savings. I hate to call them savings because it's just due to vacancies. We have funds that out of the 100 series that has not been paid out because of those unfortunate vacancies. And we're going to continue to see those vacancies. We're seeing them right now. So trying to find $132,000 in those savings due to vacancies I'm not concerned about being able to find those within this next year.
All right. Was that you, Representatives Wanitz or Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Get used to that.
We better start getting used to that again. Director Westby, so the 5 people in question we have, they are all current certified peace officers right now, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's correct.
So they carry guns, tasers, arrest people, have put their lives on the line currently for inebriated people at many of our state parks, especially on holiday weekends. They have done everything and put themselves in the line of duty that we would say most other peace officers in the state of Wyoming do. And they're doing that right now, and we'll be doing that up through next July, as far as we assume.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely. We're actually, I would say our people, and I'll take a step back. I'm horrified that we're not already in this program. I'll just be completely blunt with that. Why our individuals that put themselves on the line since the day one that we became state park, and we have rangers out there. We've had one individual, one of our people that would have been on this plan, he is now retired, and gratefully he was able to retire, was shot in the line of duty. They get called out to a, not unified command, what is it called? When we go and assist other. Yeah, so we get called out on a whole bunch of assistance from local counties, local PD, because we're closer, quite honestly. Some of our counties that we serve have 1, maybe 2 sheriffs in the entire county. Well, we may have 2 large parks. Look at Platte County, for instance. When we get an assistant call out, of course we're gonna go, because we could potentially get there and assist in a situation that can probably save lives. And that's what they do every day. They put themselves on the line and have been for, well, ever since we've been a park system. And so I am kind of shocked that we're not in the system. I'm shocked that we're today having to explain why we shouldn't. I appreciate this body back in Lander bringing it forward to get us to this point. It really fills my heart to know that we're going to get one step closer to making this happen. But yes, I guess long answer to a really short question is yes, these people put themselves on the line. They are badge carrying, post-certified, gun toting, ability to arrest. But with our plan and with our great management in our law enforcement program, we are trying to ensure that one, we're providing the best customer service to our visitor, not just from a law enforcement perspective, but from an educational perspective of what the rules, what the laws, how to behave in a state park, how to enjoy yourself at a state park without having the cuffs put on. But they have to be able to flip that switch in a moment's notice and be able to arrest and pull a weapon if necessary. So, thank you.
All right. Sorry. It's all right. It's all right. This is a good little bill. Okay. Public comment. Do we have anyone online? No? Anyone in the room wishing to testify on this topic? All right. We'll close public comment.
Move the bill.
Moved by Co-Chairman Nethercott, seconded by Vice Chairman Washit. Discussion on the bill. What about that little amendment on, no?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Representative Zwanitzer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd make an amendment, it'd be on page 3, line 19, starting with the word service credit. Just delete the rest of line 19, 2021, 22, and 23. And if I get a second, I'd be happy to talk about it.
Seconded by Representative Yin.
And so, Mr. Chairman, I would just say these people are putting their lives on the line right now and will be up until certainly next July if this bill passes. And there's no reason that they have to have law enforcement credit if they're serving these duties right now. If you look at the statute, we allow any number of other law enforcement, including dispatch. And I remember that fight about 6 years ago. And I know the dispatchers take some mental anguish, and it's a difficult job as well. But certainly people in the front lines, if they have previous service credit and they're being in these positions now, I just think it's a good public policy choice of the Wyoming legislature to say we value these people for doing their jobs, and that should be included.
Co-Chairman Nethercott.
Perhaps I'm reading the sentence incorrectly, or Mr. Fuller or Director Swindell. When you break it down, service credit in any other retirement plan, okay, so let me just ask this question to Director Swindell. Are there any other public employees that would be treated inequitably as a part of this change as applied for state parks now? Does that make sense?
Well, Madam Co-Chairman, I think if service credit, as the bill is currently written, then service credit isn't transferred. And for the people that are currently working as full-time parks rangers, their existing public employee credit will be orphaned. And what that means is kind of unique to each individual, but they're vested or non-vested and so on. I think we discussed that. But for other public employees that are, you're talking about the non-full-time people? I'm not sure I understand.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just concerned if we strike that, and I'm leaning towards striking it as the motion requests. Other than the 5 state park rangers who should be in a law enforcement retirement plan but aren't, and therefore have service that should have been considered law enforcement service, are there any other public employees other than those 5 that this would harm or apply to?
Madam Chairman, my understanding would be no, because the bill limits to full-time parks rangers. You've got other people that work as rangers in the summertime, but they work in other duties, but they're primarily public employees. And I think their situation, when they're working as a ranger, they get the same duty-related death benefits under the law enforcement plan as a result of legislation that was passed by the legislature in 2015. There's an additional 1% contribution rate that Darren pays for those people to pay for that enhanced death benefit. So no, I don't think so.
Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, what's the bottom line? If we strike this sentence, what's the cost difference of this bill with this sentence as opposed to without this sentence?
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, if I can. I think when we heard previous testimony, there's a handful of employees that are eligible, one with 1 year of service, 2 with 2 years of service, about. again, these are very de minimis numbers that would be included, no more than $100,000 probably, or around that point. Which I think the cost figure associated with this bill in total is de minimis. So that would be my assessment.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, if they were to be paid for, if the conversion was to be paid for, best estimate's $132,731. But as I said before, that's kind of de minimis in the scheme of things. The assets and liabilities of the law enforcement plan are $750 million. If the policy decision were to be just strike the language and allow them to convert, then the existing bill doesn't really even, it basically says that there's no money going to be transferred. No appropriation and no transfer. In which case, what happens is the law enforcement plan has a slightly lesser funding ratio. And it's like, minus 0.14%. It's not very big. The trouble that the retirement board would have with that is that it's not good seamanship. It's a benefit increase. There should be some way to fund it. And so if I were to preference, if you strike it and say, well, it's, you can transfer the credit, but you should authorize the Parks Department to send us money. We can't take contributions unless they're legally authorized. I can't really do a side bill with the Parks Department and say, hey, on the side, you want to give us some money for this? Unless the legislature authorizes it, at least in broad scope.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Wanitzer.
can I have a quick double question just to make sure I'm not creating a loophole?
Yep.
True or false, in the law enforcement retirement system, can you buy 5 years of credit at a one time, or is that just in the public employee system?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, employees in the law enforcement plan can also buy service credit up to 60 months, 5 years.
So
Common to both plans.
So I guess I do have a concern then, Mr. Chairman. I don't want someone to be able to jump in the law enforcement plan and then buy their 5 years at a cheaper. I can see how that could be an issue. Even though it's only 5 employees, I don't know if any of those 5 have already bought, their one-time service purchase, or if they would. But that would be a potential small additional hit if, now especially that I've said it, and put that in their minds. With that being said, I guess it's, in my mind, justified for my amendment as a public policy decision of the legislature. I don't think state parks should be impacted. I just think it's something we should have done years ago. We didn't do. These people are doing everything that other people in a different retirement category are doing. And I would be, I think, correct if we didn't transfer the money, the system would just take a small hit, and it would take another, depending on investment returns, month, days, years, depending on the market, to make up that small amount. But it would be made up, and I would say that's, a fair, small, de minimis hit to the system for that $150,000, $200,000 for the public policy question before us.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, just to clarify, to do a service purchase, one must be vested. So 2 of the people are not qualified because they're not vested. Only 2 of the people would be in a position to do a service purchase. And then with regard to days, months, I suppose it depends on how you look at it. The funding, the assets of the law enforcement plan, $750 million. It'll move by $132,000 today.
Question on the motion?
You still like your motion? Okay. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion carries.
Question on the bill?
No other motions, discussion? Question on the bill? Do you need a roll call? This is a final vote to move the bill forward. Okay, roll call vote on the bill.
Senator Cooper,
No.
Senator French,
Excused.
Senator Kolb,
Aye.
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Representative Crago,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Representative Washit,
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez Williams,
Aye.
Representative Yin,
Aye.
Representative Zwanitzer,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Nethercott, Chairman Olson,
Aye. Senator Cooper, you still have time.
Do you want to say no to aye?
that passes.
Unanimously. All right, thank you very much.
We are 30 minutes behind schedule.
We are right on time. Presumptive child support amounts, we have a bill draft. Mr. Fuller? Mr. Fuller, just to clarify for the roadmap, are you going to present all of the bills, or will some of your other attorneys be?
No, Mr. Hopkinson will present a number of bills.
All right. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, this is 23 LSO 90, version .4. It's 4-01 on the meeting materials. The committee heard an update from the Department of Family Services in May regarding a study it had commissioned on updating the child support amounts. The committee moved to have this bill drafted to amend the presumptive child support amounts that are in statute based on the recommended amounts proposed in that study. And that's all this bill does. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you'd like me to go through the specific dollar amounts in the table. So
My guess is, Mr. Fuller, that testimony from the department will probably do that for us.
Yep. So then real quick, Mr. Chairman, on the bill, the table changes on page 3, line 13. Those are the new amounts for one child. On page 5, line 2 are the changes to the table for the amounts for 2 children. Page 6, line 13 is for 3 children. Page 7, line 4 are the new amounts to the table for 4 children. And then page 9, line 17 are the new amounts for 5 children or more. And this bill would be effective July 1st of 23.
Fantastic. And do we have Ms. Arneson on Zoom? And do we have, who else do we have? Or is it just her? Oh, okay. Perfect. Ms. Arneson, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to hear from me?
Sure.
Okay, great. Chairman Olson, Madam Co-Chairman Nethercott, members of the committee, Christy Arneson, Senior Administrator of the Economic Security Division at the Department of Family Services, oversee the child support program. We talked about this in May. I'll be brief. I know we're behind, but I'm happy to answer any questions as well. As we discussed in May, and Mr. Fuller just mentioned, this came to you via a report, which is done by, who's also here today joining us, the economist, Dr. Jane Vanor. We are required to do a guidelines study every 4 years. It's federally and statutorily, state statutorily required. The last review was in 2016. This review was due in 2020 due to the pandemic. It happened in 2021. And there is a committee that handles once Dr. Vanor does the report. We have a committee that has been created. It consists of myself, some attorneys within the child support program, private attorneys, members of Access to Justice, one of the law professors, as well as this year, which we hadn't had in the past. It did also include a parent who owes child support. That committee reviewed this report and recommended the changes that you have in front of you, the changes to the guidelines. They do increase the guideline amounts. The guidelines, just for perspective, have not been updated since 2013 and are based on 2012 price levels. The average increase, and I know within the report there were quite a few examples provided by Dr. Vanor from all different levels of income. The average increase is about 12%. Price levels have increased, and this is something Dr. Vanor can talk about if it's of interest, have increased 19%. So the guidelines don't quite match the price level increases. We do know there's two scenarios at very high income that actually do hit the 20% increase mark, which would then trigger modification. But those are two of the there are many more examples that were provided. So on average, it would not trigger a need for a modification within a child support order. And I will stand for questions at this point, try to keep it brief, but happy to provide any other information that you may have.
Committee, questions for Ms. Arneson? Co-chairman, another, no? All right, I see Dr. Venor, is that, yep, welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead and introduce yourself to the committee, and then if you have anything to add, we would absolutely love to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Jane Venor. I'm an economist with Profit based in Denver, and we provide technical assistance to state guidelines reviews. And we helped Wyoming, and as Christy already explained, we provided the report to the committee reviewing the guidelines. And I'm here to answer any technical questions. Mainly, I think Ms. Anderson provided a good summary that there's been some inflation. We have some new economic data. The increase on average is 12%. For lower incomes, it's a little bit lower for most of the incomes affected by the 4D caseload, and medium incomes in Wyoming, it's going to be 7 to 12%. And then the cases where it would be above 20% are going to be more of those net incomes of about 15,000. So we're talking more like a surgeon or somebody in the medical profession that would have that higher increase. Do you have any questions? I know you're running behind, so.
No, you're doing great, doctor. You're doing great. We appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, some of this is pretty straightforward in that you have price points that are over a decade old. So I think that message is fairly obvious and clear to us. We really appreciate that. Committee, Vice Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Venor, appreciate you being here today. I just have a question about the price changes from the number of children. Seems to anticipate an economy of scale in child rearing. And as a father of 6, I'm not sure that I experienced all that. So could you explain a little bit about the economy of scale that's factored into these numbers for larger families?
Doctor?
Right. Thank you for raising 6 children. So the economy of scale is that when we look at the data, we actually look at families. And so what we do find is that for a family that raises 2 children, it costs about 50% more than 1 child. So let's say it costs $1,000 to raise 1 child. It wouldn't cost $2,000. Most families spend about 50% more, $1,500, and then it's about another 0.25% for 3 children, and then 10% from there. But I will say that, as you noted, we do talk about economies of scale, because when you would think that there would be a across the board equal increase from 1 child to 2 child, that they would all increase exactly by 11%. And that's not the case. And what we're finding in the new data is we're finding some loss in that economies of scale. And just for those that, a way to explain it is that, when you take children out after the ball game, you take them out for pizza, because there's some economies of scale, so to say, that you can share the pizza easier, but it's more expensive when you have to buy individual meals. And what we're finding in the more recent data is that probably what you're observing, that 6 children, it is more expensive probably than it was for my generation when I was being raised. I'm not sure if I answered your question quite right, so I'll stop there.
He said that's fine. You did a good job. Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, I'm just curious, and Miss Arneson, if you could send us, I don't know that we need your full report, but is there at least a summary version of that report? I mean, what you just said to us, Doctor, in terms of the percentage increases, the low to medium income, different impacts, is there something that you have prepared that's easy for us to look at?
We didn't prepare an executive summary, but we'd be happy to put together like a 2 or 3 page summary.
And
Okay. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the full report was part of our May meeting materials.
That's right. But there's not an executive summary of it? No? I mean, I don't, I think that would just be really helpful moving the bill forward. That's all.
We can do that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Committee? All right. Do we have any public comment online? Additional? No? Public comment in the room? Closing public comment? Committee?
Move the bill.
Moved by Co-Chairman Nethercott, seconded by Senator Cost. Discussion or amendments on this bill? Roll call on the bill.
Senator Cooper. Senator French. Senator Kolb.
Aye.
Senator Cost.
Aye.
Representative Crago.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Oakley.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez Williams. Aye. Representative Washut.
Aye.
Representative Yin.
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Nethercott. Chairman Olson.
Aye.
That passes unanimously.
Senator Cooper, another unanimous vote. All right, thank you, committee.
Thank you.
Next up is, oh, and thank you, Ms. Arneson, and thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Next up is probate court filing fees. We have another bill draft, 23 LSO 0002, probate filing fee amendments. Mr. Fuller?
Yep. Mr. Chairman, this is draft 0.2, 5-01 on the online materials. This is a bill draft the committee did look at briefly in May before tabling its consideration until this meeting. This bill draft would increase the amount of the original filing fee for probate cases to match the filing fee for civil cases in district court. The only change in the bill is page 2, line 1, just increases the original filing fee from $110 to $120. The staff comment just notes for the committee the different language for the ancillary fees for filings in probate court and district court. I believe the clerk submitted a letter on this topic. In the probate fee, in the probate schedule in 2-2401, it makes clear that the court automation fee and the civil legal services fee are in addition to the initial filing fee. In 53206 for the civil filings in district court, it references of the filing fee to suggest that those fees are not additional to the district court filing fee. Of course, any change or no changes is within the committee's purview. With that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Committee, any questions on the construction of this bill? All right. No? Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Who do we have? Ms. Butler? Do you not want to comment? You want to comment? It's too late now. I called you out in front of the entire room.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Elisa Butler. I am the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch. I think the reason for this bill, or at least from the judiciary's perspective, the need for this bill is the move toward further court automation and e-filing. So currently, as the civil filing fees and the probate filing fees sit, they are different. And so you need to pay 2 different fees depending on what kind of case you're filing in the district court. So the hope was with this bill is to make them the same. So when we get to e-filing, there's no confusion from attorneys about which fee they're going to pay. And so that was really the point of this bill. The way it sits right now, and you are, I'm sure, going to hear from, I believe, one of the 7 or many of the 7 district court clerks who are sitting behind me here today. But the way the bill draft sits right now, it would not it would not resolve that issue. So we would still have two different filing fees, one for probate and one for civil, and they would not be the same. And the reason for that is exactly as Mr. Fuller explained, the language in those two statutes are a bit different. So in the probate filing fee, it's in addition. So we have some additional filing fees on top of the fee that the clerks receive, that the counties receive. So the clerks keep a portion of that fee, but there are other fees on top of that. One is the court automation fee, and that is $40. That's both in the probate and the civil filings. And then one is the civil legal services fee, and that's $10 in both of those. In the probate filing fee, it makes that $50. So the 40 of the court automation fee and the CLS fee, it makes it in addition to the 110. So all together, for a probate filing, a person would be paying $160. In the civil filing fee, it makes it a part of that. And so in the civil filing, that $50 is a part of that 120. And so basically we'd be looking at two different fees again. And so really, I think the hope is that we'll try to marry those up so the fees are the same. So as we get to e-filing, there's no confusion about which fees attorneys are going to pay. I would be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. Committee, do you have questions for Ms. Butler? No?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chair, I'd be happy to kind of walk through what this looks like altogether. So the total probate filing fee, the way it sits today, would be $160. And so if you're filing a probate case, you would pay $160 to file that case. And based on the statute, so if you look at page 2 of the bill draft before the draft change, it's $110 for that base filing fee. That $110 goes to the counties. It goes to the clerks of district court. And then if you look down further in the comments of that section, the staff comments on lines 20 through 27, both of those are in addition to. So in addition to that 110, you get another $40 for the court automation fee on lines 20 and 21. And then on lines 26 and 27, you get another $10 on top of that for the civil legal services fee. And those both come to the Supreme Court. Those are for the programs that we have at the Supreme Court. One is for court automation, things like e-filing. And then the other one is for civil legal services. That goes to Equal Justice Wyoming, who provides civil legal services for indigent people in Wyoming. So that's how the probate fee currently lays out. In the civil filing fees, which would just be a general civil filing case, the total filing fee altogether would be $120. And so the way that that works, based on the language of the statute, is $70 of that would go to the counties, to the clerks. So they would only get $70 of that as opposed to $110 in the probate filing fee. And then $40 of that would go to court automation, and another 10 would go to civil legal services. And again, it's just because of the nuance of the way the statutes are written. In the probate fee, the extra $50 is in addition to. In the civil filing fee, it's a part of the total. I don't know if I fully explained that, but if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to walk through anything else.
Ms. Butler, I don't know if I don't know if you recall this, but so I was on appropriations when we built an omnibus bill to cover all the fees, and for whatever reason, we did not address this one increase, and why is that?
Mr. Co-Chairman, I might help you. There was a fee increase for the courts, of which I voted on, I think, almost every year I've been in the Wyoming Senate, to increase fees, filing fees associated with the judicial branch. I think I argued against increasing the fee for probates. We overshot it, hoping to not be approached again for an increase in a fee, but chose to leave the probate filing fees less at the original request of the court. The purpose of that is a probate filing fee is not discretionary, whereas a civil filing fee is discretionary, where you are choosing to go sue someone or file for divorce or sue someone for a breach of contract or something along those lines. A probate fee is essentially mandatory. You have to go through the probate process to administer an estate. And so as we kept increasing fees on the people of Wyoming, which is who are paying these, that is something that is hard to do. And so I put the policy position down that the mandatory fee associated with the probate, and of course in a probate, this is not the only fee that goes to the court, but of course the value of the probate, of course, gets assessed and collected by the court as well. So what the court collects on a probate filing is far greater than the 110 or 120. That's a different analysis here. The purpose of this bill really is associated with the electronic filing system and for ease of the district court clerks in collecting what the original filing fee may be. So when a lawyer or a person goes to the court and starts a case, whether it be civil or probate, they come with a check in the amount of $120. That's it. That's the purpose for this bill. And nor $150, yeah.
That's how I remember it. Thank you, Co-Chairman Nethercott. Thank you, Ms. Butler. Are clerks wishing to testify? No? No? We'll probably get you later. Public comment? We don't have anybody signed up. Public comment in the room? All right. Close public comment committee. Moved by Senator Cost. Seconded by Representative Provenza. Amendments or discussion on the bill? We had some discussion on the bill. Representative Zwanitzer?
I feel like I'm missing something, Mr. Chairman. We have a bill to raise a fee for $10. You have 8 clerks of district court in the back of the room who all came up here. Are they here for they're here for the next thing?
There's another topic that they're very interested
So
in.
we just have a bill to raise a fee for $10.
Correct.
Okay.
Representative Yin?
Sorry, it's still early for me, but
That's because you're drinking Coca-Cola, not coffee.
still trying to wake up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the good co-chairman repeat what she said about the purpose of this bill if it isn't to align the two fees?
E-filing.
It is to align the two fees. That's the purpose.
Oh, that's it.
Okay, so, but the fees in total will still be $60 different between the two.
40 would be a $120 check and a $160 check. If you want to file a civil case, $120, $160 if you want to file a probate. Representative Craigo?
Mr. Chairman, actually, as written, it'll be 100 and, I believe it'll be 170, 120 plus 40 plus 10.
Shouldn't be. It's only 150 now. Shouldn't, if it's a $10 increase, it should be 160. But help me see that.
This is a staff comment, part of the.
Mr.
Yeah,
Fuller?
Mr. Chairman. So right now, the probate, the bottom line probate total is $160. So it's a 110
Yep,
filing
I just
fee.
got there in the math. 22,401, $40 plus $10,
Yep.
$50. So
With-
it is 170.
With the change in the spill draft, that's correct.
Okay. 170. All right. Representative Craigo?
It must be early for me too. I'm with Representative Yin. I guess if I thought the purpose, as explained by the good co-chairman, was to get the final check amount to be the same no matter what filing we're making, whether it's probate or civil, because this bill does not do that. You either come in with the check for 120 or you come in with the check for 170. And I thought, when we talked about it last time in May, when we were at our last meeting, that we were trying to get to the point where the clerks don't have to explain to somebody when they come in to file what the different check amount needs to be. The clerks want the check amount to be the same. So either we need to raise one of them or lower one of them
Well,
to get to where we need to go for the purpose of the bill. Otherwise, we're just raising $10 to make it more complicated.
yeah. If the point is to align it, then the next bill that comes after this is the one to raise the civil fee to line it.
Is the point to align it, clerks? So does this bill do that? Okay. Ms. Butler, clerks, please come forward.
See what happens when you don't testify? You testify. Welcome. Ms. Butler, do you?
Mr. Chair, so my apologies, I should have explained better. Basically, what we're going to need to do if you want to align those two fees is either decrease the probate filing fee or increase the civil filing fee. The way it stands right now with this bill draft, they would not be aligned. So that's really a question for you all, and I believe the clerks of district court may have a position on that.
Clerks, welcome.
Good morning, Tina Wood, Clerk of District Court in Sundance. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, it is the clerk's position that we would like to have the filing fees be the same for the consistency of the attorneys. So when they do call and ask that there is a consistency across the state, that we are hoping the 160. It has also been an issue throughout the state in some of the different courts, whether a guardianship or a conservatorship is a probate or whether it's civil. And I think a majority of the clerks of district court across the state have indicated that they charge the $160 for that. There are some that do just the 120. I know, like in Laramie County, they just do the 120. But that's based upon a county attorney's opinion or district attorney's opinion. And we would like, with the new case management system, probates will now become a civil case. But again, we would still like to have the consideration of the legislative committees to increase the civil filing fees to the 160, with 110 going to the county as in the probate fee.
See, Ms. Wood, until you mentioned the system and moving the probates over to the civil, I thought this was it seemed pretty trivial. I mean, I don't think it's that confusing as a lawyer to know that I'm in probate court. The conservator or the guardianship, I get that. That's a different issue. But I mean, what my filing fee is, if I file enough probates, I know what the filing fee is. I don't think it should be adjusted for that purpose. But if it makes more sense in the system because it's now a civil, I can see why that will become confusing.
And you want the lost revenue from that switch, is that right?
Not necessarily the lost revenue from that switch, but just the consistency for the attorneys and everyone. You would be surprised, Mr. Chairman, how many attorneys are confused at that filing fee. And
That's a different problem.
Yes, as we are very well aware, but yes.
Yeah, okay. Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess as it is written, I don't think this is a bill that makes sense, but if we want, I think we'd have two choices, right? So we either raise the civil filing fee to the probate fee rate, or we reduce the probate fee down to the civil filing fee rate, but keeping it, if their ask is to make them the same, then we have to figure out what number that is, I think, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, a suggestion would be there's another meeting still left in our interim. If we sent this bill back to the clerks and the court to discuss further for the right solution, do you think that could be achieved with a working group? Ms. Butler?
Or do you already know the number? I mean, really, if we're raising the civil fee or lowering the probate fee, the question is just what is the universal fee, and do we know that? Do we have an idea of what we want that to be?
Mr. Chair, we do. So if you lowered the probate filing fee on line 1 of page 2, that number would be 70, I believe.
No, but Ms. Butler, I know mechanically how to do it.
Okay.
I want to know if there's an opinion. But it should be, if we have a consensus amongst our clerks and our court on what that should be, then we can we can move forward.
Mr. Chair, I would tell you the judiciary doesn't have an opinion one way or the other, but I believe the clerks do.
Okay. What is the opinion of the clerks? Other than that they should be the same, what is the dollar amount?
Mr. Chair and Madam Chair, thank you. So the
Sorry, go
clerk-
ahead and just introduce yourself for the record.
I'm sorry. My name is Mona McCauley. I'm the clerk of district court in Platte County. It's the clerk's consensus that they would like to be raised. We had sent a letter out on August 31st. So that is, we'd like to be consistent across the board for the council and for the attorneys at 160. Thank you.
Aha. So it's almost like a middle number. Mr. Fuller.
Yep. And Mr. Chairman, if that is the will of the committee, then the change on page 2, line 1 would go away. And instead, the bill draft would be to amend 53206A1. And it would be the language on page 3, lines 1 and 2 to amend that to 160.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think for Mr. Fuller, and then does the language need to be the same? So switching in addition to from the probate to of the filing fee, I mean, is that helpful? We need to mirror these?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, if the only intent of the bill is to equalize the amounts, the only change that would be needed to do so would be to change $120 to $160. And then with the other language as is, the probate bottom line would be 160, the district court, the civil fees would be bottom line 160.
Vice Chair, sorry, Representative Oakley, did you have follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then I guess question to the clerks then, does that give the right percentages that you are wanting as far as policy if it's done that way?
Mr. Chair and Representative, yes.
Now, some of those poor attorneys out there will still be confused when it's a summary probate and they have to file the appraisal fee in addition to the 160 fee. It won't be 160. Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it seems to me we're being asked to increase these fees fairly significantly, primarily because the computer system now classifies probate and civil under one heading in the computer system. Not because there's any real need in the court for these additional fees, but only because the software program we purchased has put these two together into one category. Is that true?
Ms. Butler.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Washit, so in part, it's true. I mean, the system would work better if we had consistency across the filing fees. It's not insurmountable, but it does make it more difficult for the clerks to deal with moving forward. The other piece of this is, and I think that the clerks would probably not agree, but it's not required to increase the civil filing fee. You could decrease the probate filing fee. On the other hand, I will tell you, and I think you will hear from them, that the filing fees in Wyoming are pretty low in comparison to the surrounding states. So that it's not absolutely necessary, but it does make everything much less confusing moving forward.
And Ms. Butler, maybe just as a point to clarify with that system moving probate over to civil, it makes sense. In Wyoming, we don't really have a probate court. They're not separate judges, separate courts. It really is just your district court with the same judges. So
yes,
the distinction is doesn't mean anything in Wyoming.
Mr. Chair, yes.
Okay. Access to justice? Concerns? Raising this fee?
Mr. Chair, I think there are always some concerns about access to justice. The fee can be waived if it's too high. So there are ways to access the courts if the fee is too high, I believe.
Anything else, Ms. Wood?
Just to comment about for Mr. Chairman, Representative Washit, it's not just for the lack of fees to the district court. We would really like to be consistent for the attorneys and for even the pro se litigants. We don't get very many pro se probates, but occasionally we do. But it's just the consistency for the attorneys, and especially with the e-filing system coming forward.
Ms. Clerk Wood, thank you for that. It's okay if the clerks need revenue. I have not heard as a practicing attorney, we need to fix this, that this is a priority concern. I appreciate that you probably get calls from staff of law offices about knowing how much to come with for the filing fee for the check. But we just have a posted sign for what those fees are in the office. And have dealt with it that way. So I don't know that the genesis is coming from the attorneys necessarily as one of them. But if it is a matter of ease of administration for the courts and for you, and then make sure there's no loss in revenue to your office, that's all rational and appropriate policy decisions to drive the bill forward. That's okay.
Madam Chair, if I could, we've been here many times before asking for fee increases. And, it looks, to sometimes that it's a taxing of the people. And so that's kind of why we're a little hesitant to go that direction. Yes, it is appropriate for the counties to get that additional revenue. It is like Elisa referred to, is the access to justice and the waiver of the fee that is available. It does happen occasionally, a lot of times with the pro se people that come in for the divorce actions. That's really the only kind of actions that we can do in the district court, is the waiver of filing fees for the divorce actions or anything with domestic relations. So, to be honest, I mean, we would like to have the counties have that extra revenue. So, thank you.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, because I probably never took the opportunity to ask the clerk of the court before. And where I'm from, how many cases do you see a year in probate and civil? I mean, what type of volume are we talking about here? Could you expound on, I guess, what your opinion is? Thank you.
Ms. Butler.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I would probably be in a better position to answer that, although I can't tell you off the top of my head. It does vary, obviously, by county, but we have those numbers, and I would be more than happy to get them to you.
Follow-up. Yeah. Just like I say, as an average, I realize we have big counties, small counties, a lot of court interaction in some and not much in others. But I just wonder what this really amounts to. I mean, it's $10. I mean, what does this amount to in money at the end of the day per county as an average? That's kind of what was my question. And I guess I'll wait for the information when you get it. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Another option that the committee could ponder would be somewhere in between the two values, right? I think the numbers that Ms. Butler could bring us would make a difference on how we decide that, because the revenue difference would vary depending on how many probate cases there are versus civil cases. Or maybe something just as simple as $150 for both instead of $160 for both might make more sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, or we carve out a portion of the 160 to go to the Judiciary Committee's new account.
Ms. Butler? Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to get you those numbers. We have the stats. I'm not great at math off the top of my head, so just need to spend a little time getting you those numbers, but we can get them to you.
So the probate fee's currently at 150. No, it is currently at 160. So you're choosing 160, you're just flatlining it at the existing probate. Okay. See, if I would have called asking what the probate fee is, apparently I would have brought a check for 150. What's that, Senator?
The other one's 120,
Correct.
and this is 150 or 160?
Apparently it's currently 160. I just signed the check.
So how about if we went in the middle there and said 140 and let them both be in there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Ms. Clerk Wood.
Mr. Chairman, there was mention that there's an additional $10 that was going to make it 170 in this bill. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So that needs to be stricken because then there we have another issue.
Right, right. I think at the end of the day, if this committee chooses to advance legislation, it's probably going to look a little bit different, but it comes down to whether the committee has a dollar amount that it can agree on, and then it will adjust the bill accordingly, I think.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you, Ms. Butler. Thank you, clerks. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment? We're still on. Oh, was there a motion? No, I don't think there was a motion. You're still waking up, Representative Yin. It's okay. Any public comment in the room? Co-Chairman Nethercott?
Mr. Co-Chairman, I would go back to my original suggestion of creating a small working group comprised of Representative Washut, Clerk Wood, and other members of the Clerk of Court, in addition with Ms. Butler, to discuss the concerns and come forward with a solution. I think that'd be a very helpful result.
Okay. I think Vice Chairman Washut is up for the task. All right. So I think that's right. I mean, I guess clerks and Ms. Butler, you just heard the committee toss different numbers around. So clearly, I think this committee doesn't know what it would do with that. I think you need to come with a solid plan that makes sense. I'll be very honest, I don't think legislative wise, going to the floor of the House and just saying, oh, we're raising the fee because we want them all to be universal and all on the same page. I don't think that's not going to make sense. So we've got to have, when you do land on a number, I think if there's a revenue concern, you just have to be honest about that and give it to us. And if there's not a revenue concern, then maybe the fee needs to go the opposite direction. But I don't think that's a selling argument, at least not on the floor of the House. I doubt it would be on the Senate either. I mean, there's at least a couple of lawyers that would say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. So figure out what that is and a good reason behind it. And then I think to the extent you can put together those figures on what would that dollar amount increase in the budget. I just think that's helpful to look at. So good luck. Co-Chairman Nethercott.
Mr. Co-Chairman, so just for clarity for Mr. Fuller and the committee and the public, we will keep this bill draft and this topic on for our third meeting. It'll look exactly the same, but we will anticipate you coming forward with a solution that makes sense so we can amend the bill at that time and either adopt it or not and move it forward. But that's what that will look like procedurally for everyone involved.
And Mr. Chairman, just maybe
Mr.
as a
Fuller?
quick matter of procedure, if Senator Koss, he did move the bill, so just to withdraw that.
Okay, I guess that did happen. Senator Cost, you're okay to just go ahead and remove that. All right. Oh, okay. Well, thanks for letting us know. All right, Senator Cost has withdrawn his motion. And thank you, Mr. Fuller. We'll take 5 minutes. We'll be back at 10:20. All right, welcome back, Judiciary Committee. Like I said, 10:20. Quick 5-minute break there. We were doing so good. We were moving so fast. I didn't want to get out at like 3 o'clock today, so we had to slow it down a little bit. All right, so we are on treatment courts, substance abuse issues. We do have a bill draft 23 LSO 0096. Mr. Fuller?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is working draft point 5, 6-01 in the meeting materials. The committee in May heard testimony regarding the treatment court program and their current placement with the Department of Health. The committee moved for a bill that would transfer that program from the oversight of the Department of Health to the judicial branch. And that's exactly what this bill draft does. It makes various conforming amendments. In fact, a majority of the bill is simply making conforming amendments to correct references from the Department of Health to the Supreme Court. Generally, this draft does not change any of the substantive provisions or requirements that are currently associated with the treatment court program. These are just conforming amendments. This is just changing the administration of that program to the Supreme Court. So page 2, lines 6 and 7, this just moves the short title from its current location in Title 7 to Title 5, Chapter 12, which are 3 sections that deal with the judges' roles in treatment courts right now. All of the statutes concerning the treatment courts will be moved into this article. And then the rest of the changes on page 2, lines 12 and 13, 21 and 22 are just statutory reference changes. Same with the change on page 3. The changes on pages 4, 5, and then lines 1 and 2 of page 6 are changes to restitution statutes just to change statutory references. Then on page 6, line 21, this section in 9.2.102A3 specifies duties for the Department of Health. And among other things, the department is required to withhold a percentage of contract amounts until that provider agrees to certain performance and outcome metrics to be included in the contract. All this change is doing is just striking the reference to drug court, since it would no longer be under the purview of the Department of Health. The changes on pages 7 and 8 are changes to statutory references in the Child Protection Act and the Juvenile Justice Act. Those are the only changes on 7 and 8. And then beginning on page 9 is section 2. And these sections are being both amended and renumbered. So this is where the bill will start to move sections from Title 7, Chapter 13, Article 16, to Title 5, Chapter 12, Article 1. So this would be within the title of statutes that deal with the courts. The change on page 9, line 14 is a change to statutory reference. The change on page 10 is just a naming reference. Pages 11 and 12 are changes to statutory references. That's the same on page 13 on the bottom. And then page 14, the change to what will be 512-107A does include one item of substance. And on page 13, line 15, this would strike a limitation that was previously imposed on the Department of Health to spend no more than 10% of the total amount of funding that's provided under the program on administrative department expenses. So that sentence would be stricken here. Of course, how to address that is up to the committee. The remaining changes on page 13 and then pages 14 are corrections to statutory references, as well as naming references to reference the Supreme Court. On page 15, lines 2 through 6, under current law, a panel that consists of various entities of the executive branch, so the Attorney General, various agency directors, a chairman of an advisory board, the state public defender, or their designees, serve as a panel that makes a final determination on an application for whether a court supervised treatment program meets the qualifications of the act. This bill would strike that panel and place that responsibility for approving treatment programs to the Supreme Court. The remaining changes on page 15 and the top of 16 are just naming changes. On pages 17 and then again on 20 are changes to statutory references. Page 22, line 22, this is a change, a naming change, but the staff comment on page 23 is, and again, this is a policy consideration, but that change on page 22, line 22, specifies that each program must provide or strive to establish a system that participants are provided treatment services that are certified by the Supreme Court. And the staff comment just notes whether the Supreme Court is well suited to certify treatment providers, or if that should be left to someone with a different set of expertise. Then on the changes on pages 24 and 25 are just naming changes. And then moving to page 27, there's another naming change. And then section 3 of the bill is where statutes are renumbered without any substantive change at all. So this is just moving those statutes in the Court Supervised Treatment Programs Act from Title VII to Title V. Page 27, line 12, repeal 713-1601, which was previously the short title of the act, which has been moved into existing 512-101. And that's the staff comment on the bottom. Page 28 is where the bill begins to specify how this transfer would take place. So page 28, line 2, specifies that the Court Supervised Treatment Program would be transferred from the Department of Health to the Supreme Court on July 1st, 2024, and all property, equipment, obligations, and any unexpended funds of the Court Supervised Treatment Unit, which is a specific budget unit within the Department of Health, and these funds in the unit are used for the program, would be transferred to the Supreme Court unless otherwise provided in this section. Page 28, line 12, specifies that nothing in the act shall be construed to impair any existing contracts or obligations that the Department of Health enters or has entered into before July 1st, 2024. The Supreme Court would be required to assume those responsibilities, those obligations, to the greatest extent possible. And this, now I'm on line 21. If there is an agreement or obligation that the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, is not able to assume lawfully, the Department of Health would be required to retain those agreements and contracts. Page 29, line 4, specifies that any unexpended, unobligated funds that are appropriated and any positions that are allocated to the Court Supervised Treatment Unit of the Department of Health on July 1st, 2024, would be transferred to the Supreme Court on that date. And the remainder of that subsection just clarifies that any funds that are appropriated in the 2024 budget session, in the budget bill for the 25-26 biennium, so funds appropriated and positions allocated in that session to that unit in the Department of Health would also transfer to the Supreme Court. Page 29, line 16 is rulemaking authority for the Supreme Court. Page 29, line 20 requires the Department of Health to consult with the Supreme Court regarding any agreement, contract, or other obligation that the Department of Health seeks to enter after this section takes effect, if it does in the next session. And then page 30, line 4 is a reporting requirement for the Supreme Court and the Department of Health to report back to this committee by August 1st of 2023 regarding a plan for the transfer that would take place in 2024 and any recommendations for legislation that may be necessary to best effectuate that transfer in 2024. The staff comment on page 30 just notes that the committee may wish to consider whether any additional funding or positions are necessary for the Supreme Court to assume this program, and in light of the discussion in May. And then the effective date would be split. Section 6, which is the reporting requirement, the consultation requirement, the rulemaking would be effective immediately. The remainder of the bill would take effect on July 1st, 2024. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions.
Committee, questions on the construction of this bill? All right, thank you, Mr. Fuller. Our Supreme Court, we have Ben and Chief Justice Fox and Ms. Butler.
Good morning.
Welcome, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's nice to see you again. And thank you for the time to talk about treatment courts. Since we met in Lander, we've had a good opportunity to work more on how such a transition would work from the Department of Health to the judicial branch. And that's thanks in large part to a good working relationship with the Department of Health and Director Johansson. So we have some answers to the questions that you asked at our last meeting. One thing right off the bat is with respect to the question that Mr. Fuller raised. On page 22, lines 21 and 22, the Supreme Court is not in the business of certifying treatment providers. That would stay in the Department of Health's wheelhouse. I think the big question, though, for us to answer is the one I think you asked last meeting, Senator Kolb, and that is, why would treatment courts do better in the judicial branch than in the Department of Health? And the answer is no reflection on the work that Health has done. The answer is that Health has a lot of other priorities, and running courts of any type is really not in their wheelhouse. Whereas for us, treatment courts are a top priority, and operating courts is what we do. It's a bit of a fluke that the program ended up in Health in the first place, because as you know, in most states, treatment courts do reside in the judicial branch. I think today there's all the more reason for treatment courts to be in the Wyoming judicial branch. As Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court, Loretta Rush, said, courts have become the government emergency room for society's worst afflictions: substance abuse, mental health, domestic violence, and homelessness. Our branch is adapting to that reality, and the full utilization, improvement, and enhancement of treatment courts is part of that adjustment. I think this bill draft is a very good start. As you can see, the full implementation wouldn't be until July of 2024, and that will give us time to work with Health and make the appropriate plans for a good transition. It requires us to jointly report with the Department of Health to you in August of 2023 what our progress is. And at that time, I think we'll have a lot more meat on the bones of the transition plan. We're not going to ask you today for more positions, but I want to be honest with you, in August of 2023, we might be doing that. Treatment courts will function better in the judicial branch. We have the expertise, the focus, and the judges to do this very well. So with that, unless you have questions of me, I'm going to turn it over to our legal counsel, Ben Birmingham, to give you more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Birmingham?
Co-Chairman Olson, members of the committee, Ben Birmingham, it's a pleasure to be with you again today to discuss treatment courts. And in one sense, the issue before you is rather narrow, moving treatment courts from the Department of Health to the judicial branch. But in another sense, it's part of a much broader conversation happening in Wyoming and elsewhere about better addressing mental health and substance abuse issues. So what I'd like to do today briefly is paint the bigger picture and explain how treatment courts fall into that larger discussion. And after I paint that bigger picture, I understand that Judge Christensen is here a longtime serving treatment court judge who may be able to offer some additional reasons and justifications for this restructuring. Wyoming, like every other state in the union, faces a mental health crisis that's been made worse by the pandemic. And there are some experts in the room here today that could speak much more articulately to this than I could, but the research is clear. And the research shows that 3 in 10 adults suffer from anxiety or depression. In 2020, Wyoming led the nation in suicide death rates. And we also know that mental illness goes hand in hand with substance abuse. The Kaiser Family Foundation found that in 2020, 15.1% of adults, there was an increase of 15.1% in adult substance abuse. And drug overdoses have increased from 2019 to 2020 nationwide. They increased 30%, and from 2020 to 2021, they increased an additional 15%. Here in Wyoming in 2018, we had 66 overdose deaths. In 2019, there were 79. In 2020, there were 99. So this mental health and substance abuse crisis certainly isn't limited to Wyoming, but we do tend to have higher rates of mental illness in other states, and we also have lower rates of access. And this combination of high rates of mental illness and low rates of access places us near the bottom in terms of overall mental health. We were recently ranked 48th in the nation. And the consequence of these high rates of mental illness and low rates of access is that our courts become the de facto mental health system. And the statistics really lay bare what anyone working on the front lines can tell you, and that is that our court system and our criminal justice system houses the mentally ill and the addicted. Nationwide, 70% of inmates face a mental illness disorder, a substance abuse disorder, or both. In Wyoming in 2020, 86% of the inmate population had a behavioral health need. Most inmates require some sort of substance abuse treatment. And our point here is that incarceration is not the best avenue for treatment. For one, it's expensive, and then it's not always effective. Chief Justice Fox, after we met in May, circulated to this committee a cost-benefit analysis conducted by the Wyoming Survey and Analysis Center. And that cost-benefit analysis puts the cost of incarceration per inmate per year at $44,000. That's the average cost. The marginal cost is $10,000. That same analysis puts the average cost of treatment courts at under $8,000 a year and the marginal cost at $3,000. So treatment courts are less expensive and they're also more efficient. A task force, a judicial task force on state responses to mental health found that after incarceration, folks face a greater risk of overdose, a greater risk of relapse, and a worsening of their underlying mental health conditions. And we see this in our courts on a daily basis, and the courts here, the judges here could speak to this. There's a direct impact of our courts serving as a de facto mental health system, and that impact is clogged dockets and repeat offenders that require and exhaust judicial time. And given this direct impact that we see every day, that treatment courts are a high priority, because we've also seen with our treatment court judges that treatment courts work and they can address that underlying mental health and substance abuse issue. That is, treatment courts break this unproductive recycling of individuals through the criminal justice system. So our current system of arrest, prosecution, incarceration, supervision, just to repeat it again when the individual relapses, treatment courts can cut that cycle off by addressing the underlying issues. So this is a top priority for the judicial branch. And because it's a top priority, we are committed to getting the most out of treatment courts. We're committed to establishing treatment courts in areas where treatment courts do not exist. And in those areas where treatment courts do exist, we're committed to enhancing them by adopting uniform standards based on best practices, by enforcing or implementing those best practices through training and technical assistance and effective quality control processes, by centralizing data management analysis so data can drive our best practices and the improvement of our treatment courts. And all this will be done through an administrative staff at the Supreme Court. But the more important point for today's discussion is that this expansion and enhancement of treatment courts will be backed by the vertical leadership of the Supreme Court, a higher court to a lower court. The current position or setup or structure is horizontal leadership. Staffers at an executive agency branch trying to tell judges how to run their treatment courts, and it's not a fair structure to the Department of Health, and it's not terribly effective. We'd submit that a more effective leadership structure would be a vertical leadership structure with the Supreme Court providing leadership to lower courts. We're also committed to exploring supplemental funding sources to help better fund our treatment courts. And not only are we committed to getting more out of treatment courts, as the chief referenced earlier, we think that treatment courts are better placed, it's more structurally appropriate to have treatment courts and judicial branches, and that's because at the end of the day, treatment courts are courts. We fully acknowledge and appreciate that treatment courts are made up of many important players, treatment providers, defense attorneys, prosecutors, supervision. But what distinguishes treatment court judges from other treatment court team members is that the judge has the power to convene, the power to bring these different stakeholders together, to link treatment with criminal justice. And treatment court judges are the leader of judges, so treatment court judges, or excuse me, so treatment court should be within the judicial branch. Treatment court judges are also the key driver to success. What distinguishes treatment courts from other forms of treatment is that participants must regularly report to a treatment court judge in a black robe, in a formal courtroom, and must account for their progress to receive encouragement and awards, or to receive sanctions for failure to comply with the program. That's what makes treatment courts different. That's what makes treatment courts tick. And at the end of the day, like I said, treatment courts are courts. Certainly they feature a more collaborative approach than most judicial proceedings, but they also feature those core hallmarks of a judicial proceeding: due process, court rules, advocates in the form of prosecutors and defense attorneys, and then a judge who's applying these rules and laws to hold participants accountable for their progress. Chief Justice Fox referenced earlier this smooth transition. I think what will help make this transition is an implementation date of July 1st, 2024. It gives us time to continue our productive relationship with our valued partners at the Department of Health. And in some ways, this is similar to the Chancery Court, where the legislature created a new court, but then gave the Wyoming Supreme Court time to lay that administrative groundwork, time to find the staff, time to draft rules, find a case management system, electronic filing system. That, I think, will be the key to a smooth transition. So I hope that paints a bigger picture of how this whole treatment court restructuring fits into the larger conversation and discussion about better addressing mental health and substance abuse in Wyoming. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm certainly happy to stand for questions, but it might be helpful as well for the committee to hear from Judge Christensen.
Committee, do you have any questions at this time? Oh, Ms. Butler, did you have something, sorry, to add? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything to add. I would just like to say thank you to the Department of Health. They've been incredibly helpful in helping us learn about the program and working in the transition or the potential transition. So they've been very gracious with their time.
Representative Craigo, then Vice Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know if this is a question for Ms. Butler or for the Chief Justice, but if we look on page 15 of the draft, under the current makeup of the program, there's a panel that decides who gets funding at the county level, which in my mind is can be somewhat political. And as the bill draft is written, it says the Supreme Court would then make those decisions going forward on who gets funding, who does not get funding. And I guess my question for either Ms. Butler or the Chief Justice is the Supreme Court comfortable making those decisions? Or as we go forward, do we want to think about also having some sort of panel that would make recommendations to the Supreme Court rather than the 5 justices making that decision on their own?
Chief Justice Fox?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crago, I think that's something that we can formulate in the next year or two. The panel that exists now that's been stricken in the current draft, I think is quite cumbersome. And so we'd like the opportunity, probably through rulemaking, to adapt to something that's more responsive to the needs of not just the individual communities, but the treatment courts statewide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chairman Washit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple places in the bill draft, there's references to district courts and tribal courts. And you mentioned the horizontal versus vertical supervision. And I guess my question is the relationship between the Wyoming Supreme Court and tribal courts and the independence of district courts, does that get muddled in this process?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Washit, that's a good question. We do not profess to have any vertical control over either tribal courts or probably district courts either. However, the treatment courts typically are in the circuit courts. And so to that extent, a treatment court program supervised by the Supreme Court would work within our current structure. District courts and tribal courts, to the extent that tribal courts would use it, are really more referring courts to the treatment courts, but don't operate them.
Senator Kolb, then Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about workload. With the circuit courts, I mean, I had heard in the past that they're quite busy. Will this increase that workload? Do they have the capacity? It's a two-part question, I guess. And then the second part would be for the Supreme Court justices, do you have the time to be this vertical manager of this system? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I think that Judge Christensen may want to respond to that because he's one of the circuit court judges who does conduct a treatment court. It would add to their workload. That's true. I think that the judges and also court commissioners who run the treatment courts are very committed to the benefits of those courts and are willing to put the time in because they see their effectiveness. So yes, it adds to the workload for the judges. And as I said, Judge Christensen is probably a better one to answer it, but from what I hear from all of our treatment court judges, they are committed enough that for them it's worth doing. As for the Supreme Court workload, yeah, honestly, the burden will be on the administrative staff, so I'm looking at the two people on either side of me, and their plates are full, but they keep on adding more to them, and we think we can absorb those administrative demands as well. Although, as I said, I think when we start to really look at the implementation, we will be coming to ask for a position or two if we want to enhance treatment courts from what they are today. But for the time being, I think we can all handle it, and it's worth handling.
Senator Cost?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the question of possibly needing to add additional staff, is there staff from the Department of Health that would be coming over with this, or do you see that as not possible?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cost, there is a position right now in the Department of Health that's dedicated to treatment courts, And at the time that we take over in July of '24, that position would be part of the transfer. Thank you.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think it was mentioned that there might be other supplemental funding sources. Where are those sources, and maybe some examples, dollars?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it looks to me like Ben's all ready to answer that question.
Go ahead, Ben.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Administration has a number of treatment court grants that states can apply for. There's an adult treatment court discretionary grant program. There's a veteran treatment court discretionary grant program. And then there's a juvenile treatment court discretionary grant program. And let me give you an example of what the state of Montana has done. The state of Montana treatment courts are all within the Montana Supreme Court, and they've been quite active in pursuing these grants. For example, they recently obtained a grant for a little under $600,000 for teleservices, so to provide treatment courts to those rural areas where there's a lack of providers and lack of treatment courts. And I believe it was in 2020, the state of Montana was awarded a little under $2 million to expand treatment courts and to add 4 additional treatment courts. So that there certainly are some federal sources of funding that have not yet been explored.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Birmingham, I'm looking at the bottom of page 29, where it states that the Department of Health shall consult with the Supreme Court regarding any agreement, contract Department of Health, any contract that the Department of Health seeks to enter on behalf of the treatment court. So I guess my question is, as a result of the transition, will there need to be any cancellation or termination of any existing contracts that would cost the state money as a result of the transition, to your knowledge?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, I can't imagine so. I think one of the selling points of this legislation is that the transition happens on July 1st and not January 1st. And July 1st date is important because treatment court funding runs from July of one year to July of the next year. So it should be fiscally clean. And I think this provision would allow us to work with our partners at the Department of Health to avoid the situation you're anticipating where we'd have to, or we'd have a contract that we'd be unhappy with. I think our positive working relationship with the Department of Health in this provision would allow us to avoid that exact circumstance.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this can be for either Chief Justice Fox or Mr. Birmingham. But going back to the workload increase question, it seems to me when we listened to your testimony in the first meeting that there was a huge efficacy, right? So you saw a lot of people who didn't return to courts. Do you anticipate that that workload will decrease on that increased workload that we're going to see on judges decrease over time because we're going to quit recycling folks that keep coming back through the system?
Representative Olson, Representative, I think that's the goal of this whole transition, is to make treatment courts more effective so that we can break that unproductive recycling of the mentally ill and the addicted through the criminal justice system. Now, it certainly may take some time, right? The rates of mental illness are high, substance abuse is high, and it will take a while to scale treatment courts to fully address the needs of Wyoming. But the hope is that eventually we can address this unproductive recycling. And if you look at that cost-benefit analysis that the chief circulated after our last meeting on this topic, it shows that graduates of treatment courts are much less likely to reoffend. So I see that's the point here, but it certainly will take a little bit of time.
Senator Cost? Sorry, Senator Kolb.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There's too many Ks and Cs.
Too many costs, Kolb, are all the same. So on grant compliance, how do you foresee this working? You get a grant, and I know everyone, I'll just be a little anecdotal about this, that there's a pot of gold out there that you can tap into that no one else has seen. However, grant compliance is very difficult. And so how do you propose that that would be taken care of so you wouldn't have a grant compliance issue, and i.e. then have to pay back money, if the grant was not properly handled? How would that work?
Chairman Olson, Senator Kolb, I think it's important in addressing this question to note there are different types of grants. There are certain grants that are statewide grants where really the judicial branch, Supreme Court, would be responsible for meeting those reporting obligations. But then there are court or program specific grants. And ideally what we'd like to do is pursue both, pursue those statewide grants and then support local programs in obtaining these grants. But certainly we hear the concern and would want to make sure any grant we pursue is a grant that we are prepared to comply with fully. I think some of this would come from a more robust administrative staff that could support courts in this in this pursuit. I'd note that the legislation gives the Wyoming Supreme Court rulemaking authority to establish rules that govern treatment courts. And I think any grant requirements could be reflected in those rules. And that's one mechanism the court would have to ensure that programs are adhering with grant responsibilities.
Follow up, Senator.
Okay, thank you for that answer. But let's say something happens and the grants aren't met, like at the federal government, whatever level said that, no, you don't make the compliance necessary to receive the grant. How will that be handled? I mean, I know just the grant issue is a big deal, in compliance. And who has that ultimate responsibility, and how will the cost be covered if a grant's executed and then found out that the grant is not complied with? I'm very concerned about what that could mean in the future.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I think that's a very valid concern. The Supreme Court and our administrative staff is accustomed to handling grants like this. For example, our Children's Justice Project is funded by a federal grant. We handle a lot of money and a lot of reporting responsibilities, and I have extreme faith in our administrative staff in being able to meet the requirements for that kind of compliance.
All right. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Judge Christensen, why don't you come on up if you'd like. Oh. No, I'm just caution. I always hesitate when I'm telling a judge to come forward. I'm used to the reverse. It's just, I'm still getting used to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chair, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Brian Christensen. I'm a circuit court judge here in Natrona County, have been for 8.5 years, throwing these numbers out. But I was with the District Attorney's Office for 29.5 years. I came out of an office with Mike Blonigan and John Masterson and Pat Crank, so I was obviously the social worker in the office. Part of my duties were to investigate the development of drug courts in the early 2000s. And I also was skeptical, well, here's another program they're sending me to see how this works. It didn't take long to win me over. We were part of a planning grant that went to 3 different sites, Sacramento, Buffalo, and Dallas, and saw both the operation of the drug courts there as well as training on how to implement them. Then we received a implementation grant, federal implementation grant, 3-year program, and several, and to my surprise, we weren't the only ones in Wyoming. There were several of us operating that way in the state of Wyoming, and had those type of grants. And visionaries in this state realized we needed to have continued funding after those 3 years. I was just one of the grunts and was just working in the program, and it happened rather quickly. And even though the history starts with 2009, I think from LSO's history, 2001, there was a drug court statute, 510-101, that started the funding from the state to these local programs. The local programs existed before the state funding started. And there were implementations throughout all our counties, I think almost all, if not all, to look at these drug court programs, because at that point, addiction was a revolving door justice. You were an addict, and it was probably the easiest cases to prosecute. You were either in possession of drugs or you weren't. You were either high or you weren't, under the influence. You know, they were easy, but you'd lock them up for a while, and then they'd get out and they'd go back to their old lifestyle. The frontline people, the trial judges, the district attorney's offices, the defense attorneys obviously had seen major concerns in this area. And drug courts were a potential answer. And drug courts have been studied to death for 30 years. It's the only criminal justice program I know that's been empirically studied with phenomenal results. These programs work. And Senator Kolb's question about the time involved, we do it because it works. You know, if we didn't do it, we would just keep sitting back and be reactive and not proactive. And even drug courts can be looked at reactive because we only take them after they're convicted. But if you look at it, we become proactive too, because we're trying to change behavior, trying to make these individuals that come before us productive members of our society. Want them to get their jobs, get houses, get their families back. We have so many success stories, and I think I've asked if you wanted me to bring some graduates with me to see how amazing some of these people are after 20 years. But I think the committee's well aware of how well these drug courts operated and decided that it wasn't, you didn't have that time for us to fill your room full of drug court graduates. But as to Representative Provenza's question on recidivism, this is maybe based on science, but it's not science. We're dealing with human nature. And I've had individuals come through our drug court programs 3 times. They relapse. And in fact, if you don't relapse on our program, something's wrong. The way we watch with our intensive supervised probation, with our intensive outpatient programming, with our substance abuse treatment personnel, we're going to catch you. Maybe not first, but we will. And so we're surprised if we don't catch relapse. If somebody flies right through it, we either misdiagnosed or somebody's really doing, and it's hard, but somebody may have actually pulled the wool over our eyes, but that would be hard to do. So we have seen people come back, relapse even after graduation. It is not a cure, but it is not a cure just to go on the way we were. These drug courts, just to give up on them is sad to see. And over the last 20 years, we used to have drug courts in the mid-20s. We had a lot more in our smaller communities. They've faded away. Almost at least a third of our drug courts. It was, and I think the note was that we were at 15 or 16 at this point, 3 of those alone being in Cheyenne. So I urge the committee to take advantage of this evolution of thought and belief in the judiciary to oversee these programs, to revitalize and evolve them. We are missing out at this point and not being more effective in mental illness treatment and There is obviously a connection, and we're trying to figure out, once we get an individual clean and sober, is there a mental illness there as well that we need to deal with? The other thing, over the years, we've lost our public defenders. They pulled out for budgetary and work reasons. I think we might have been able to address that better in the judiciary. The other question about grants, again, these programs were started with us writing the grants. And I myself, I can't tell you how many I've written: VOCA, VAWA, OJJDP, JDAI, Community Juvenile Service Board, special grants from the AG's office, governor discretionary grants, and that's just the ones I can think off the top of my head. I haven't heard of anybody getting in trouble for not being in compliance with the drug court grant. They're very able to mold those grants and they'll bring in people to assist. If it's on a federal level, you can get federal assistance to come in and help you. We've had some of our drug courts around the states write for mentor grants. They become mentor courts, and they're using those grants to teach other courts and how to be mentors. And as I stated, these are local first. They didn't come from the state. The state provided our funding source, which we're very thankful for. Like when I first started, I wasn't even thinking about that too much. I knew it was out there after those 3 years ran, but the state jumped in right off the bat and got that funding to continue these programs. The problem is that, as stated, even on the best efforts of Department of Health, they're not on the local boards. They're a state agency. They're not sitting at the table with the teams. They're not sitting there with the local law enforcement and your local providers and your probation officers and your judge and DA and county attorneys or defense attorneys at this point. They're not there. It's still local driven. And they do not have the ability to enhance and evolve these programs like the judiciary will. And as we always said, it was easy to convict addicts, but this multi-agency, multidisciplinary approach, it took people and diverted them from the criminal justice system, as well as from the welfare and social impacts that occur in this state as well. You're seeing benefits all throughout the system, not just in the criminal justice system. Most of our younger females have kids, and they're trying to get those kids back from Department of Family Services. This gives them a program to help them become clean and sober, and we have a lot of success in reuniting families in this program. And just leave you, I'm sure maybe somebody will pick things up on some questions, but just leave you can't have a court supervised treatment program or drug court without a judge. You've got to have a judge to operate these programs. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you and see what notes I missed as I read down this.
Representative Lorson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Do you see there needing to be more judges and courtrooms if this is taken over?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson. I don't see more. It could be, it depends on workloads. Some judges are, I was just trained in this, so I'm in this in Natrona County. We're very busy, but we make the time for us to operate a drug court as well as a student court. We have 2 courts going on that are court supervised treatment programs that if we didn't see success, we wouldn't be involved in because of all the time that takes to be involved in them. But we make the time because we think they're that important.
Yeah, Judge, just kind of following up on that, it's so refreshing to have the judiciary taking the lead on this because, the statement that you said you have to have judges to make this work. I think that's the other piece that's happening here is a philosophical alignment, if you will, within the judiciary. If it wasn't already there, now it's in the forefront. To prioritize this, the statistics that Mr. Birmingham has in his PowerPoint, we're very familiar with Chairman Nethercott and under Chairman Kirkbride had undergone an extensive study in Wyoming, which pulled a lot of these stats out. The 86% of the 2020 inmate population in Wyoming has a behavioral health need. The one statistic that's not in here, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like, we have a low recidivism rate in Wyoming. We should be proud of that, of course, but it can be better. But there was a statistic about, it was like 60% of revocations of probation, those individuals had an underlying health issue as well. So to the point of whether it's going to require more judges or more court time, I think that the goal is to say, right, Judge, that we obviously recognize the super majority of folks going back into the system, not just coming into the system, have this underlying issue. And if we can attack it and we can address it, then we can reduce that recidivism rate even more.
Mr. Chairman, it reminds me of the old commercial, you can pay me now or pay me later. This becomes such an issue because you have revolving door justice if you don't have a program and aren't proactive. And even though we're reactionary in our programs because we gotta wait for a conviction, it is proactive. We're trying to change this behavior. We're trying to change and make our community a better place to live and make our people that are suffering from addiction have the opportunity to become productive members of society.
Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge, appreciate you being here today. Two questions. The first is just a very practical question. On page 16 of the bill draft, it refers to all of the employees of a program of an applicant. All the employees shall be employees of the applicant. And then it carves out judicial branch employees and corrections personnel. How does that work with law enforcement personnel in your court? Are they employees of the program or are they still employees of the law enforcement agency?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Washit. They are employees of their law enforcement. Not sure, there must be an exception on that somehow, but so the employees of Department of Corrections, law enforcement, we have in-house providers that are employees of the program, but most drug courts contract with providers throughout the state.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the recycling offenders back through and the expense that creates. I, for one, am not certain that drug courts are going to save money. I think that society is producing more and more incoming individuals who may not be recycling, but they're going to keep our drug courts plenty busy no matter how well we deal with the recidivism side of things. So I just think that this, for the committee's sake, I think this is a better approach. It's a proper way to deal with people who have these types of problems. But I think it's going to be more expensive. I think when you start providing the proper level of mental health care to people who need mental health care, it's going to be more expensive than hiring somebody from the Department of Corrections or somebody from your county jail to monitor those people all day. So do you have any, do you think that's going to happen, or you really think that we're going to save money?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Washit, I've told a few people of you, and probably including you today, we've not won the war on drugs. Fentanyl's kicking our butts right now. We're dealing with another scourge beyond methamphetamine, and we either have to attack it and become proactive or sit back and let it take us over. And the more we can be proactive, the more it will save money in the long run. I know it's just a piece of paper that shows what funds potentially are being saved out there, but it is worthwhile. Not only do you see success and people becoming, parents and being great citizens in your community when they can kick the habit, but to not do otherwise. And a lot of these clients will tell you, if you hadn't got me in that program and made me do it, even though they volunteered to do it because they don't want to go to the pen, if if you hadn't made me do that, I'd be sitting in the penitentiary or I'd be dead. So that's, and you hear that a lot.
Co-Chairman Nethercott?
Thanks, Mr. Co-Chairman. Just briefly, Judge Christensen, because of your almost 40 years of experience, which is,
I lost a decade somewhere. And I tell everybody I started when I was a delinquent too. So,
well, appreciate that very valuable knowledge that you have, and understand it's kind of anecdotal, but just some brief overview, and don't want to go off on a tangent here, but think it's kind of helpful. What are generally the characteristics of a drug court participant?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chairman Olson, Madam Chair. What you're looking for is a substance abuse evaluation, as well as when they come to the court system, first is the first contact point, and they're not usually first offenders. You may have somebody that it needs an intensive outpatient programming or residential treatment on a first offense. It could happen, but you really don't have a hammer to encourage them to participate in a court-supervised treatment program. You usually have you want at least a 6-month jail sentence, a year jail sentence, or a penitentiary suspended sentence over their head that gives them both a motivation as well as your ability to enforce just walking away. If you had just a first offender, which may just get a fine or supervised probation, they're not going to do drug court.
So quickly clarifying, have they been charged with a felony or a misdemeanor?
Madam Chair and Chairman Olson, both. We take felonies, misdemeanors, and parolees.
And are they solely drug-related or substance abuse-related crimes, or are there other criminal charges associated with their admission into the drug courts?
And the original startup grants, Madam Chair and Chairman Olson, they had to have a substance abuse, but that is no longer the case. If it's tied to substance abuse, we see things like grand theft, burglaries, things like that that are associated with their substance abuse. They may get a ASI that comes back saying they still need a level 2.1 IOP programming or residential. And then with that type of, if their sentence is going to be more than just a supervised probation, they would probably qualify for drug court, even without having an underlying conviction in your court. But most of them, the far vast majority, have to deal with drug or alcohol convictions.
And does admission into the drug court mean that the defendant is not convicted or adjudicated? Or are there any times when the potential conviction is deferred or?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chair, yes. You could have, in fact, we have an individual that's got a felony that potential deferment on a 301, though he has several misdemeanor possession convictions as well. So usually a deferral would mean you wouldn't see somebody in a drug court program, but it can happen. You could get a deferral. Our statutes are set up as post-conviction. There are drug courts around the country that have pre-conviction programs, but their due process and oversight of those are a lot more difficult. But again, we're looking for individuals that are impacting the criminal justice system to a degree. They're going to be looking at long-term incarceration or jail sentences, as well as qualifying on their ASAM criteria and ASIs as a IOP or residential.
No further questions, Counselor?
No, I just think it's helpful.
All right. Anything else, Judge?
Okay. I
All
may
right.
be adjourned.
Yeah. Director Johansson.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Stephen Johansson with the Department of Health. I'm joined by Matt Petrie, who is the Senior Administrator of our Behavioral Health Division, which currently oversees the treatment court programs. I'll start and be brief with respectful of your time, that we are supportive of this bill. Obviously, as has been mentioned, there's some issues to work out over the long term before implementation. But I would echo Chief Justice Fox's comments that over the summer, I think the relationship and the discussions have been very productive on a number of different fronts around mental health and substance abuse, including this one. I expressed to you all at your last meeting, I believe in May, that I had some operational concerns, certainly supportive of the concept of where and how these programs could be more effective at achieving the goals that they're set up to achieve. That involved financial issues, regulatory issues, data management issues, compliance issues. Many of those in concept have been worked out through the discussions over the summer. I think can be handled through memoranda of understanding, as well as really appreciate our suggestion of kicking out the effective date of the full implementation of this to the next biennium. That's very clean on the budget side. And also gives us time, as Chief Justice Fox mentioned, to make sure that we don't let anything slip through the cracks on this transition. Relatively speaking, this is a small program for the Department of Health. You all know and are probably frustrated by the size of my budget. And so the comments that were made before, that this is often an overshadowed program, I don't think are unfair in the context of the Department of Health, and might be a higher priority in the judicial branch, I think is certainly an apt analysis here. Nevertheless, even a $5 or $6 million program in the Department of Health is not insignificant, and it does have management challenges and management needs that are certainly real. And Matt and I are proud of the folks that we have in managing what you all have given us, both in law and budget, over the years as effectively as possible. And I think if this bill were to pass, having 12 to 18 months or so to make this implementation or transfer as successful as possible would be very much appreciated. I did want to mention, I know there's been some talk about the data and statistics, just because I think it would be unfair for Wyoming to be castigated as the last state in terms of mental health rankings. Those are very challenging studies, and the methodology behind them often, especially one of the ones that was cited, basically the caveats there, or don't trust this data for Wyoming, the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho, basically your rural and frontier states, because it relies on such a low sample size. I don't say that because there aren't challenges with mental health and substance abuse service delivery in Wyoming. There are, and we have a lot of improvements to make, ones that I'm excited that with the legislative branch and the judicial branch, we are on track to make in the short term here. But we often get a bad rap in Wyoming and other rural and frontier states for being so low ranked, when you just can't compare those stats and those studies to California or New York. It's very unfair. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to stand for any questions. Again, joined by Matt Petrie here if you have operational questions or concerns that the Department of Health could answer. But we'll close by saying we're supportive of this bill. We'll do everything we can if the legislature passes it to make this transition as successful as possible, so that, as I mentioned, things don't slip through the cracks, and so that we can use programs like this to better serve the folks that I think we all want to serve better and keep out of institutions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director, I think it's quite all right if you sit for the questions, but there are none.
So funny.
All right. I try to lighten the mood, Thank you, Director. Director Schmidt, do you have, okay. Public comments online? Okay, public comments in the room? Yep, please.
This is Commissioner Hendry.
Welcome. Welcome, Commissioner.
There we go. Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Rob Hendry. I'm a Natrona County Commissioner, and I'm here today to really support Judge Christensen. Ever since I was a commissioner in in 2006, he has been an integral part of this drug court and really made it work. And I think it's really helped the citizens in Natrona County as well as the state. You know, the Department of Health, I did call them, and while they don't do anything directly with it, the Natrona County Department of Health, they say that because of the drug court, the people that they see in their offices are really helped by the drug court, and the good work that Judge Christensen has done over his term there. As far as the commission, Judge Christensen has come before he was the judge over to talk to us about helping him, and we've supported him whenever we can. There are some, like the tobacco settlement money, there are some monies out there that maybe we could funnel over and help a little more in the future. But as far as the, you know, there's two avenues that we see, and that's one of them. We have a health foundation now because of the sale of the hospital. That could be another possible way to get money to the court system. You know, and the bottom line is that I know there was questions about the cost, and maybe this cost is going up, but in Natrona County, it's going up anyway. The drug abuse is going up. The fentanyl's coming in here across a border that you know, our sheriff talks about that all the time. We see it more and more. The coroner's office sees it more and more. And so if we can help through these programs, I think it's a lot better. And the judges, you know, they would much rather have these people in treatment than sentence them. And I haven't talked to him about that, but I'm sure that's right. They want to help people. And so, but Mr. Chairman, on another note, I'm the vice chairman of the management committee at the Wyoming Business Alliance. And we need people for our jobs in the state of Wyoming. We need productive people. And if we can get these people, if we can save them through these kinds of programs, it's going to help our workforce. So that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Questions? Committee? Co-Chairman Endicott?
Thank you for your leadership, Commissioner Hendry. Your participation here is really important and provides a different level that we're not used to hearing from, but very valuable. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just really want to say over the airwaves that I really thought I was going to see my own Commissioner, Gunnar Malm, here on Zoom.
It is notable that Commissioner Malm is absent today.
But thank you, Commissioner. Andy?
Good morning, committee members. Andy Somerville, Executive Director for WAMSAC, the Wyoming Association of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Centers. I appreciate taking just a few minutes here to talk about this bill draft. In general, WAMSAC is intrigued about the idea of having more judicial involvement in drug court, amongst other mental health topics like Title 25 or Title 14 with juveniles. That judicial involvement is critical to making those programs more effective and getting better outcomes for our clients. That being said, we do have just a couple of things that have maybe paused for questions. The first one I'd point out is the dissolution of the funding panel. While I understand and certainly understand the comments previously about administratively burdensome or just too much, that certainly can happen. The one thing the funding panel does provide is a variety of perspectives from stakeholders. And in the mental health and substance abuse world, one of the things that we fight on a day-to-day basis is the siloing of services or siloing of services within agencies or different areas, and they don't talk to each other. that funding panel certainly provides a perspective, and maybe that's an advisory panel, or I don't know what that could be in the future, but having Department of Family Services, Department of Corrections, public defenders that are all going to encounter people with substance abuse problems from different aspects of life and different points of entry into various systems, we think is a pretty critical component, again, to trying to make sure we're assessing each community's needs to the best of our ability. I have absolutely no doubts, and certainly my community mental health centers would all go to the mat and make the argument that they need more funding and more slots, and this is why for their community. But again, trying to keep a good statewide perspective might be important. The second item that I want to talk about is just in regards to provider management. And for anybody that's ever had any experience in healthcare or clinical management, it certainly has some challenges sometimes. Our preference, certainly from the provider perspective, is to keep that certification and accreditation in terms of the types of clinical services following evidence-based practices being managed by the Department of Health in some capacity. Now, that could be through an MOU or some other mechanism, but when we read through the legislation, it was a little unclear as to whether that would be something that would be doable long-term, or that would be pulled completely under the Supreme Court. Again, a mixed, having both the Department of Health and the Supreme Court at the table seems maybe like a good way to move forward on that. The last comment I want to make is just in terms of the grant dollars. I think I share, and certainly my centers share, the frustrations of having grant dollars out there that we can't pull down. I can say from the perspective of the community mental health centers that run some of these programs, there are other grant dollars that are out there. A lot of them through federal entities or other entities that are available directly to the drug court programs are usually small dollar, $50,000 or less potentially. And the administrative burden for those grants, it just doesn't make it worth it. They don't have the bandwidth, the capacity. At the end of the day, they're spending $1 to get 10 cents in grant money. So while it is frustrating, I just want to acknowledge that there certainly is grant money out there that may not be being pulled down, but that certainly is a struggle on the center or provider part as well. With that, I stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Somerville?
Thank you.
Ms. Somerville.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Simoneau and I represent the Wyoming Counseling Association. Starting, we would like to thank the Supreme Court for their interest in drug treatment courts. Their support we are very grateful for their support and their interest within this program. All of us, I believe, are wanting what is best ultimately for Wyoming. We do have some overlapping concerns with WAMSAC, so I will not repeat those. We would like to see some type of advisory panel, if it is not a funding panel, to keep those stakeholders cooperating, not just in drug court, but also the multitude of different courts that have been discussed today. Our concern really falls on grant compliance that was mentioned earlier. The majority of our private providers within the state do not have any type of administrative staff. They are one panel or one shingle shops across the state. So them managing any kind of federal grant compliance is going to be difficult. What we would ask is that as this conversation moves forward, knowing that private providers within the state are going to need some type of state supervision or support in order to make sure that grant compliance is kept and those dollars are not kept or asked back. And then finally, our greatest concern really comes down to the current mental health reform that's happening within the state. For those of you who have been in the legislature the last few years, you know that we have been working diligently on mental health reform with Department of Health and the overall funding structure and making priority populations the core of who's being served from those community mental health centers, and then who is not being served being the focus of those private providers. The date of that bill is 2024 is when we are hoping to have that transition done. as has been stated, we are very overwhelmed by the mental health needs of this pandemic. And the transition, that reform is also taking a toll, not just on our community mental health centers, but our private providers as well, making sure that transition goes smoothly. Therefore, we would like to ask for actually a date of July 1st of 2026. This seems incredibly far out, we recognize that, but we also appreciate what the Supreme Court is trying to do with timing this to a biennium year, as well as the funding of treatment courts. And so in doing that, setting that off by another 2 years is what we would think would be ideal. Ultimately, we leave that though at the decision of the legislature. And with that, I stand for questions.
Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I maybe want just a quick overview of what the private providers relationship looks like on day-to-day with the drug court. So in concerns with grants and having help with that, wanting to know kind of like, what does that look like in your day-to-day life on your end?
Ms. Semino?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, as far as a private provider who is involved within the drug treatment court, as of right now, they are having to keep up with the credentialing process that is through DOH, that is through the Department of Health. On average, the reason I say that is because I'm pulling this from memory. That's a credentialing process that's once every 3 years. Adding on that grant compliance, a lot of those are unknowns. Is it a yearly grant? Is it a 2-year grant? Similarly to what Ms. Somerville said, are we spending $10 to get pennies back? And so it is important to know that in many of our federal grant situations that nonprofits and other associations are getting, that there is that administrative staff there. So for me as the messenger, I'm hoping to communicate that the majority of the private providers in Wyoming is a one person answering their own phone, managing their own calendar, doing their own billing. And so federal compliance is not on the to-do list as of today, if that helps.
Representative Craigo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just thinking about the program as it exists today, because we're talking about a program that already exists, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, yes.
Okay, and so I guess I'm a little confused because right now the private providers, are they doing grant compliance right now? Because this program operates on a grant through the state, through the Department of Health, to our local county level. And so I'm having a hard time figuring out in my head how that's going to change just by switching which agency at the state level manages that. Is that a fair question?
Ms. Semino?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, if I misspoke, I absolutely apologize. My understanding in the presentation earlier was that by moving the program from Department of Health to Judiciary, that it would free up new possible grants and new possible money that is out there that with where the program is now is not able to be pursued. Those are the unknowns that I'm speaking of. If I misunderstood that though, and if I am misspeaking, I would completely own that, as I am highly caffeinated right now. I like disclosure.
The opposite of Representative Yin. Representative Craigo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that answers my question. Is I'm not sure we envision any additional grant compliance requirements necessarily on individual providers. There may be additional compliance at the county level they manage that right now. I know in our county they do. That's how it works. It probably operates the same in Judge Christensen's program here in Natrona County, that the county is responsible ultimately for some of that grant compliance, but it doesn't necessarily affect the providers, the private providers, and maybe it will going forward, but as it sets now, I don't think it does.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, correct.
Oh, sorry, Ms.
Oh, sorry.
Ms. Semino?
Yes.
That's
the end? That's it?
No, it's just that's the end.
That's the
There
end.
wasn't a question.
Yes, sir.
On Ms. Semino, though?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Oh, please, come on up.
Now that I want this chair, it's the only one, the green light. Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, Cheryl Foland, members of the committee, Cheryl Foland with the Wyoming Association of Addictions Professionals. And my comments will be very brief. I agree with my colleagues and everything that they've stated. I will add that being a private provider, with the credentialing as it currently stands, the majority of private providers are unable to participate as providers in the drug treatment programs because of the certification and credentialing requirements at this point. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Committee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Additional public comment? Oh, yeah, Director Shannon, I'm sorry. I should have brought you up earlier.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, committee members, I'm Dan Shannon, Director, Wyoming Department of Corrections. I just had a few comments and I'll attempt to answer a few questions that the committee has raised today. With Chief Justice Fox's opening comment reference to the justice in Indiana, that societal changes are making the judiciary system, the emergency room, corrections has become the hospital. And I can't emphasize that enough, and the importance of these specialty courts. And just for a few comments, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't introduce Administrator from Probation Parole, Colton Herrick, next to me, so he may answer a few questions, and I apologize for that. With currently, we have 18 specialty courts across our state. 12 of these courts, the Department of Corrections participates in. 5 of which we assign correctional probation officers full-time, and the additional 7, it's a blended supervision between specialty courts as well as general supervision. And with that being said, Mr. Chairman raised a comment about the health needs of those under supervision that are revocated. And it's currently, right now, Wyoming, we're at 52% total revocations from probation, with 64% of those individuals have some form of healthcare needs. Representative Washut made a comment about more expense, and in a certain way, looking forward, I have to agree with that. The treatment certainly works. On the other end of the spectrum, with those getting out on parole, we're one of the best in the nation. We're below 10%, and that tells me the treatment works. So where we're investing our revenue clearly will state what our outcomes will be and what the overall cost may be. Representative Washut also, I believe, questioned how, as far as the applicants, how does that fit under a certain classification? And 713, I think it's 407, state in this bill, which clearly defines the supervision of the probation and parole officers, which I was thankful to see. Lastly, just last 2 comments would be Judge Christensen's comment regarding the judge needs to be the focal point. I couldn't agree with that anymore. And I, so on speaking on behalf of the Department of Corrections, have committed to Chief Justice Fox of we'll do whatever we need to do to make this a smooth transition as far as being a team member. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Director Shannon. Co-Chairman Nethercott.
Thank you, Director Shannon. Quick question, do you find more success for offenders after coming out of prison and on parole as opposed to straight probation?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, that number is very clear. The individuals coming out of parole, our revocation rate, and we're looking at that on a 3-year average, is less than 10%. Those under supervision, offenders who have not been incarcerated, and actually we're improving as a state, but right now it's 52% males and females. It's even higher for our females.
It's even higher for the females, Director Shannon, is that right?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct.
And Director Shannon, do you attribute that to the treatment received to defendants while incarcerated?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, it certainly has an impact of the treatment. We're managing human behavior risk, and while they're incarcerated, we have a responsibility to provide every opportunity that we can. And I don't believe that opportunity is available for a number of reasons across our state for those who are not incarcerated.
So following that logic, Director, is it an accurate statement that prison is more effective at reducing recidivism and relapse rates than straight probation?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, I would respond, financially it is not.
Financially, it's not.
Financially, it's not, and my point by providing the comments in the numbers that I provided, less than 10% and 52% respectively, the purpose of indicating was that we could put our money on the forefront ahead of time before we incarcerate them. To answer your question, yeah, our outcomes are better, but it's really showing how we're spending our revenue across our state and where we're putting our money. And if I had the choice, and I want to be careful I'm not lobbying,
there's a reasonable inference being drawn by the questions I'm asking and based on the objective data that we have available to us. But certainly collective wisdom indicates that keeping people connected into society and working and connected to their families has better outcomes. But there is this subjective data that we have. Just want to continue to discuss the inconsistencies between the two and leave it there. No, that's a bad spot for you, Director. Thank you.
Madam Chair, it's not a bad spot, it's the truth. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Representative Zwanzer.
Not a question, Mr. Chairman. I did just want to recognize, if you hadn't seen, that Director Shannon is the Wyoming nominee for the Council of State Government's Henry Toll Fellowship Program. We only get one every couple of years. And Director Shannon is going apparently to Kentucky for a couple of weeks here. And I was just making a shout out. It's a pretty rare honor to be recognized by CSG. So Director Shannon is our person.
Yeah, that is phenomenal. Thank you, Representative Zwanzer, for sharing that. Let's give Director Shannon a round of applause. Congratulations. That really is, I just have watched the Department of Corrections turn around quite significantly under your leadership and just really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, you just can't comment after that. It's like a language, right? Yeah. All right, thank you. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go back to your comments in May, I believe, Director, that you said that your program would be completely overrun without the drug courts. Is that accurate? Like that you would just have more folks in your programs or in your facilities without drug courts?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, those alternative incarceration probabilities that we have, without that intervention, I couldn't see where else they would land except for in our institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a follow-up question would be then, in terms of cost effectiveness, because I keep going back to we're going to be saving potential, or the research indicates $7 per dollar we spend, and trying to understand kind of how that number where that number comes from, and wondering, is it that providing these treatment and drug court and healthcare, being that it is more, I guess, more likely to keep people from relapsing and ending up in prison for longer amounts of time, is less expensive than what I think, what's it cost, $42,000 per year per inmate on average? Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, it's $44,000 per year per inmate.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I wanted, based on some of the questioning prior to from Madam Chairwoman Nethercott, I'm confused on the recidivism and the cost savings. And so maybe you know the answer to that or can kind of clarify that, or maybe it's Chief Justice Fox Because I know we talked about that data in that first meeting, and it was clear that these programs work. And the cost savings is astronomical. So I'm trying to kind of find that difference when we talked about probation and parole.
Mr. Chairman, I think, and not to step on any of the subject matter experts' shoes, I think probably some of that data indicates that the drug courts in Wyoming include misdemeanor defendants or solely substance abuse related defendants that may not get a prison term associated with their underlying crimes, where our Department of Corrections, if you're being incarcerated, there's probably a significant underlying crime or a profound repeat offender who's being incarcerated. And so there's a difference between the underlying characteristics between who's coming into our drug courts and who we're trying to prevent getting incarcerated, and then those that the Department of Corrections is seeing incarcerated, probably is distinguishing that data.
All right. Once again, thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have any additional public comment?
Mr. Chairman, we do have someone online now. We have Laura Schmid-Pizzato from the Southwest Counseling Service.
Excellent. Okay, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Olson, Chairman Nettercott, and members of the committee. My name is Laura Schmidt-Pizzato. I am from Southwest Counseling in Sweetwater County and have been involved in treatment courts since their inception back in the early 2000s. And we have been the treatment provider for the Sweetwater County Treatment Court since that inception. Additionally, I've written several of these grants that you all are talking about, and I've also sat on several iterations of the standards committee for treatment courts over the years. So I think I'm going to just be very brief. I do agree that treatment courts are super important in holding people accountable. The difference with treatment courts is that treatment's hard, change is hard, and treatment courts provide that accountability and allow people to stay in treatment even when they don't want to. When things get rough and difficult, then they get to stay in treatment because there is that accountability that's held. I don't have a direct opinion on where treatment courts should be housed. Should it be with the judiciary? Should it be with the Department of Health? But there are 2 points that I want to make for the recommendations. And the first is, please don't water down the standards for the providers. Providers currently have to be CARF accredited. There are certain evidence-based practices that go along with that. There are national standards for treatment court providers, and it's very important that we do not water this down within the state of Wyoming. And then the second point is there's only so much money, as you all know better than I do. So please don't take the funding from current successful courts and move those to other startup courts. We either need additional funding that's going to go into place, or there needs to be some measure of success, some measure of whether or not people have their slots filled. I know in Sweetwater County we could easily take additional slots and fill them, but please don't take our funding and move that to somebody else's. And we need to have a fair funding panel like what we have now. It might be cumbersome, but we have to have a hearing every year. We go through our numbers of where what slots we've filled, and we need to make sure that we continue to do that. So thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions? Oh, we really appreciate you zooming in. Thank you. Oh, I spoke too soon. Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Schmidt-Pizzato. Is the 2024 transition date an issue for you as a treatment court provider?
Chairman Olson, Representative Yin, no, that is not an issue whatsoever. For treatment providers, it really would make very little difference for us of where this is housed. So it really doesn't make much difference to us as long as we are continuing with the same standards and the same funding. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any additional public comment? All right, closing public comment. Committee.
Move the bill.
Moved by Co-Chairman Nethercott, seconded by Representative Swanitzer. Discussion on the bill? Well, actually, let's take some amendments on the bill first, then we'll have general discussion. So I know of at least one amendment that we do need to make. Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Hopefully you and I are thinking the same page.
Not, it could get interesting, but.
Yes.
We're
Mr.
thinking of-
Chairman, on page 22.
Yep.
Line 22, we need to change the strikeout from department. Under the current bill draft, it strikes out department, changes that to Supreme Court. We need to change that back to department with the correct verbiage as provided by LSO.
Okay, moved by Representative Craigo and seconded by Senator Cost. Does everyone understand the amendment? Question on the amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Amendment passes. Any other amendments? Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback on the First Amendment consideration, page 29, lines 16 through 19, insert, and I'll probably need Mr. Fuller's help on this, but something along the lines of Department of Health shall oversee provider management, accreditation, and evidence-based practices when it comes to under that rulemaking authority in line 16 through 17 and 18.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Representative? I'm now tracking where you're at. You're under section 6 on page 29,
Yeah,
line
page
16.
29, looking at section 6,
Okay.
line 16 through 17 state the Supreme Court shall promulgate all rules necessary to implement and manage the court supervised treatment program. Amendment, insert there afterwards, Department of Health shall oversee provider management, accreditation, and evidence-based practices as recommended by the counseling associations.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Representative Lorson. Is there discussion, Co-Chairman Nethercott?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Mr. Fuller.
If I may, on page 14 of the bill.
Want to put it somewhere else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you know, one thought is that section is just a non-codified section that's really intended to just make it immediate, that they would be able to begin that process immediately. On page 14, though, and this would be new 512-107C, the changes to that subsection would already give the court authority and the requirement to establish standards, so rules and regulations, including establishing standards consistent with the key components of drug courts. So that language would exist. Whether that is different from, you know, from accreditation requirements, which I believe are contained in statute elsewhere, not omitted in this bill.
But I thought, Mr. Fuller, if I understood the motion, that it was, that obligation was being placed on the department. And the Supreme Court wouldn't have the authority to, through rule, place that responsibility on the department, or I suppose they would.
Mr. Chairman, so the question would be, you know, could the Supreme Court work with the department or
require them in rule to do that?
Or require the Department of Health?
Because
So
I thought that's what I understood it, the motion.
So my apologies, Mr. Chairman, if it is to have the Department of Health promulgate those rules, that would require a different language in the bill.
Was that the intent of your motion, or yes? Okay. But still, I agree that the non-codified section may not be the best place for it. But we can move it where needed if passed. So discussion on the amendment. Representative Oakley, then Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd like, well, there's some discussion, clarification. My understanding of what I heard was a concern of like who's doing the substance abuse evaluation. And I don't want to create a whole monster of connecting it with the Department of Health if it's not necessary, because it is an accredited counselor it has to be that can do the ASI, the ASAM, or whatever it may be, evaluation. So you're not going to just have an evaluator saying it's a 2.1, which requires this, that isn't accredited. So it isn't that the Supreme Court would need to have somebody else do rules for them. They just have to have an accredited evaluator. So I don't know that this is a fix that needs done, is my discussion, my thought.
Just, thanks. Could I just have the Department of Health come up? Just ask Director Johansson a question. I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure he agrees with me on how this would work. Yes. Yeah. So with the current wording of the bill, it would be my expectation the Department of Health would still be certifying, you still have a list of providers who have to go through requisite training and requirements, and you would still have those people in the state system. All we're asking is for the Supreme Court, if they took this over, to ensure that any person on the program team providing services are accredited or sanctioned by the Department of Health now, and that doesn't change. Would that be correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, yes. In our discussions with Chief Justice Fox, the Supreme Court, and I think what's being articulated here by the committee, there's a couple of different functions, one of which I hear the intent would be to remain with the Department of Health, and that would be provider certification and accreditation type oversight. What we currently do both for the treatment court providers as well as mental health and substance abuse providers for other contracted areas of the department, we have no issue continuing that. That really is a Department of Health function that lives within this and in programs broader than court supervised treatment. So those functions, Representative Zwanitzer, we could absolutely continue. The other regulatory functions, reviewing applications, determining funding, what you see articulated in the bill here is really conforming statute to move that away from the Department of Health over to the Supreme Court.
Vice Chairman. Vice Chairman Washer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johansson, on page 14, line 21 and 22, this section is referring to the authority of the Supreme Court, and a previous amendment said that certification process was going to remain with the Department of Health. So I'm just wondering if you would read this the same as I do, that if we just struck the language after maintenance and before the word "and," take out the certification requirements for treatment personnel out of this paragraph, that would conform this section with the amendment that we just made.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, Director, go ahead.
Representative Washit would certainly defer to the committee and potentially the Supreme Court here. I think the answer to that is yes. Anything relating to provider certification or accreditation, I don't think it's the intent to remove that from the Department of Health. So any conforming language accordingly there, we would certainly be supportive of, especially as things move from Title VII Department of Health land to Title V Supreme Court land.
Okay.
So I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, the amendment is necessary the way I'm hearing it discussed here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Question? Oh yeah, we're on an amendment. I am sorry. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Okay. That amendment, all those opposed to the amendment? Oh. No one, do you want to vote on the, I'm sorry. This amendment has clearly failed for a lack of any ayes.
Back on the bill.
Back on the bill.
Back on the bill. Question on the bill.
Question on the bill.
Senator Kolb has a discussion.
Okay, Senator Kolb.
Good thing I jumped right in there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I put a preface to this that I was county commissioner for 8 years, and we had drug court in Sweetwater County. And I will tell you, it works. It worked in Sweetwater County, and it continues to work in Sweetwater County. So the history of it has been outstanding. And maybe it was a combination of the people we had there, but they were very effective in making positive changes. However, The issue I see here is shifting power. Shifting power to Supreme Court, siloing the vertical up idea of management, and that's what I'm opposed to. So I just wanted to say that for the record. I like drug court, it's great, but I just can't go along with this moment. Thank you.
All right, let's vote. You ready to vote, Co-Chairman? Let's vote.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator French excused, Senator Kolb,
No?
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Representative Crago,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Representative Washit,
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez Williams,
Aye.
Representative Yin,
Aye.
yep, Representative Zwanitzer, Co-Chairman Nethercott, Chairman Olson,
Aye.
that passes.
All right, so real quick, as we are impeding on the lunch hour, however, we do have one more bill under this segment, and it's 23 LSO 114, child endangering controlled substance use while pregnant. I am just curious if there's anyone here that, you know, we're a little bit behind. So if you've traveled to, or you have other arrangements that are going to impede upon your ability to testify, if we hold this back till lunch, I want to know that now, and we can move, you know, we can move into some testimony now. But if everyone's okay with picking this up after lunch, then I'd like, it's a clean stop. I just want to make sure. And
Mr. Co-Chairman,
please.
If we break now for lunch, when would we come back?
Well, we are a little behind, so I would prefer a quicker lunch. Committee, is that?
So 1:30, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which really means 1:40, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Well, depends on how many.
I believe if anyone needs to be on the road by 2 o'clock this afternoon, that they need to come forward and testify right now. So committee, what I think might be best, and I know that there's a member in the audience that would like to do that, has traveled this way and has a very important function. Please come forward, doctor. I know this is just best to get. Okay, great. Let's break for lunch.
See, I made eye contact with Sheila. I knew it was, I got the okay over there. But I'm not gonna.
All right.
Let's break for lunch.
Break for
1:30.
lunch. 1:30.